And then when
Okay, the cameras come by.
Hey, good morning. We're going to be getting started in just a minute here, so feel free to get a last minute stretch in and perhaps turn your phone on silent. And yeah, get ready for us to share some knowledge and spread the good word. So stay tuned. Sure. For the push today. All right, we'll open Great. Yeah. Okay. This will go up. Okay.
Wherever you want.
I have like young brand yeah. That's my book on it. But you're next.
Oh, it's in the coat pocket. So, yeah. It's in your coat pocket.
Okay. All right, we're ready to get the conversation started this morning. Good morning, everyone. We welcome you here to the Cannabis Advancement Conference of 2019. My name is Ann Brum, and for those who don't know me, I'm the founder of Joint Venture & Co. It is my pleasure to welcome you here this morning on behalf of our partnered organizations, Veterans Alternative Healing, and the Cannabis Community Care and Research Network. We'd like to start by thanking all of you here today, our keynote speakers, our panel speakers, our staff, especially Clinton and Karen, wherever you are, our study partners, sponsors, and District Hall. Today marks the first of 6 statewide events taking place in Massachusetts that will serve as a community development as well as raising awareness of our citizen science data project study. Our hope for this collective project is it will serve as a credible, comprehensive communications tool for both the public and those in policy to help those who need it now. We're here to raise awareness about our project and move this conversation forward. Without the help of our study partners and sponsors, this wouldn't be happening at this time, this day, and this minute. We're proud to be here with all of you today, not only to support, but to be part of this open dialogue about cannabis and wellness to end pain and suffering for our veterans as well as our entire community. At this time, I would like to introduce Stephen Mandilli and Sid, not all about you, Steve, from Veterans Alternative Healing. Thank you.
Yes, it's right there.
I think you have it in your hand.
You're right, I did.
There we go. It's all right. All right. Thank you for everyone that came and attending today. Super appreciate everyone being here. Oh, sorry. Thank you to all of our partners and sponsors as well. Special thank you to Ann, Clinton, Marion, and Randy. This team we have put together as we're doing some amazing things, and it's all surrounded around and based in compassion and providing healing. So I'll start with a few things about the veteran population. The Department of Veterans Affairs estimates there are just under 20 million veterans currently living in the United States, making up 6.6% of the total U.S. adult population. Of those nearly 20 million, roughly 4.5 million of them have disabilities sustained from their service and are receiving disability compensation from the Department of Veterans Affairs. In Massachusetts, we have an estimated 323,000 veterans, 1/5 of which of those veterans have disabilities sustained from their service and are receiving disability compensation from the VA. Right outside here is the Massachusetts Fallen Heroes Memorial of the Global War on Terror, honoring the 272 men and women of the Commonwealth who have fought and made the ultimate sacrifice, given their life so that we may go to sleep tonight and every night safely under the blanket of freedom they have provided. Please join us in a moment of silence to honor and respect those most courageous women and men, and to show our gratitude and support to the Gold Star families that love them and wake up every morning and go to bed every night missing them. Thank you. Just have a few personal words I wanted to share with everyone here today. Please give me a little bit of time. This is uncomfortable, but regardless, there's other discomforts I've gone through that have been much worse, and many more have as well. My recovery started out of finding purpose. Wanting to not be on those drugs was not enough. You see, my addiction made it easier to be comfortable, living in a state of hate and pain. I hated other people and their problems. I hated hearing others tell me how to live and how I could heal. But more than anything, I hated myself. Hate is easy. Hate and pain became an impenetrable shell that I was alone in and very uncomfortable in, very comfortable in. Hate and pain allowed me to put any and all blame on everything around me. Fortunately, I had and have a person in my life stronger than me, who could always love me more than I could hate myself, and continues to bring me to the dark places that my physical and mental pain bring me. That person is the mother of our incredible daughters and my wife. She's my guiding light through the roughest of storms that rage on through my mind. Through her strength, I began to focus on change instead of hate and pain. It reignited the fire inside of me to serve my family, my fellow veterans, my state, and my country by doing everything better than I did the day before. I believe recovery starts from within ourselves, but is best done with a support system. Support that puts no expectations on perfection. Support that allows you to fail and make mistakes, but remains there to provide a hand up, a shoulder to lean on, and proves that no matter how hopeless a moment feels, that it's just that, a moment. So do not be afraid. I believe that every moment, every day is another opportunity to take action. without any fear of failure. To be confident that every time you fall, you can get back up, and you can go stronger, greater, bigger as the person you were before that moment. Know that there is no person who has ever been perfect, and you don't need to be either. There is no easy road. There is no excuse great enough to stop you from taking action. All success comes after you have failures, mistakes, defeats. They all teach you lessons that you get to use on your next attempt. If you refuse to quit, you can accomplish anything. You have to believe it's possible. Everything you've done and been through to this point has come from you believing it's possible. From never quitting, you have made it through every good and every terrible day. So please believe me that you can accomplish any goal as long as you never give up. This is the beginning of a network of support and assistance for other people on their journey for healing and wellness and improved quality of life. Thank you.
Wow, Stephen, thank you. So now we have a special treat here. We were able to be welcomed by the Grinspoon family to Lester's living room, Dr. Lester Grinspoon's living room, and we were able to get his thoughts on the future of cannabis research as well. So take it away, Clinton.
Commonly known as the grandfather of medical cannabis, Dr. Lester Grinspoon is an emeritus professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. His 1971 book, Marijuana Reconsidered, was reviewed on the front page of the New York Times Book Review and was seminal in shifting our national debate in favor of legalizing cannabis. He has been heavily involved in the research and advocacy for cannabis legalization for 50 years, and to this day, at age 90, continues to advocate for people's right to access cannabis, both for medicinal and for adult use.
I'd love to hear the story about how this all started.
Well, it was Colonel Sagan and I were the closest of friends. And it was right up until the day of his death, we were each other's closest friends. Very shortly after I met him, we were invited to his apartment, and he lit up a marijuana cigarette.
Marijuana cigarette.
Here I was, a psychiatrist whose interest was in psychopharmacology, and I was a kind of, I wasn't an expert, but I was supposed to know about those things. And I said to him, Carl, you mustn't do that. Why not? He said to me, and I said, because it will harm your health. And he took another puff. And he said, here, Lester, have one. I can assure you it won't harm your health. And I had the greatest respect for Carl. And I thought, I had to take that seriously. I think he's wrong, but I've got to give him the data to prove it. You got to see the data. He has to see the data. So I went to the Conway Library, and I was going to read some things on cannabis, but I became so involved. I found it so interesting. I don't believe the publication in Conway Library touches on cannabis, and I didn't read it.
Would that be the first systematic literature review on cannabis?
Well, maybe. I can't make that claim. It was the first systematic review for me.
Yeah.
And that's how I became interested in this. And I could be reassured that my friend Carl wasn't on
That's
the news.
okay.
And so, in fact, when he said, here, have a puff, you'll love it. I didn't make much of it, but a lot of people don't. Many people who smoke for the first time even have more than one puff. It didn't mean anything to me. But maybe it was a big placebo that worked for people. That's great. That's gonna hurt. That's not gonna hurt.
That's a good question.
Yeah, really.
That's a good research question. And you studied so long, then after that, wrote a book, Marijuana Reconsidered, and are really a true trailblazer in the field of cannabis research. So we all have to thank you for that.
Thank you.
But they refused your professorship at Harvard.
They did, even after my second book on that. I've written, I can't quite remember, I think it's, what is it, 7 or 8 books, Betsy, something like that.
Wow.
It's a changing. But at any rate, Harvard didn't like that either.
Yeah. What did they, it's just a real struggle. Could you
Well, I think it ultimately compromised my full professorship.
Yeah.
I was never promoted to full professor.
Yeah.
I mean, I know exactly how it happened and who won the faculty really persuaded the promotions committee that they should promote me for that reason.
There's many in the community now that are trying to advocate at Harvard to get your professorship, and a few Dan Adams at the Boston Globe and to get into working on it.
But they said, they made the point that I really don't care. I didn't get a professorship. And my poor mother wanted the poor thing had to die knowing I never got the professorship. Leave.
Well, you've led, in lieu of professorship, you've changed much for cannabis science and the area around it, and for advocacy, and having real understanding now of the medical value of cannabis.
And I think the most important contribution, I hope you do not think that's too immodest of me, is that I helped make it possible because, it clearly I'm not crazy, I've accomplished something and so forth and so on, and I use cannabis and I think it's useful.
Mm-hmm.
And in some of the writing, I go into the ways in which I think it may be useful to people. It's so different. I mean, it's okay. It would be okay with me if humans were never interested in altering, as I say, their sense of consciousness. But to the extent that they are, and I certainly am, to the extent that they are, it's great to have a way that they can do it that's safe and very interesting.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, after Carl Sagan gave you the marijuana cigarette, you then stopped drinking.
I stopped drinking as soon as I have wine at dinner, but I used to come home from work and I'd have more than one jigger or whatever, and so I don't do that at all. I'm not interested in it. There isn't, well, I guess there's some gin in there.
But your work advocating that it is a safer alternative has been extremely important. And I think you're absolutely correct that you did unlock this for other researchers and for the general public, and it played a tremendous role in breaking down the stigma around cannabis. And I think, now, what do you think, now it's legal in Massachusetts?
Well, I was going to answer what you said. I think it's not just that the stigma has taken a nosedive, but that people are coming to understand that it's useful. There are a number of ways in which it's useful to some I should say, useful to me.
Mhm.
And I have reason to believe from what I've read and discussed with other people, useful to other people as well. So that it's not just that it's fun,
Mhm.
it's a nice experience, but it can be useful.
And we're finding out there's now many more researchers that are coming online now in this new, at least even in the last 5 years. And there's a lot of science, obviously, in Israel and other places, finding all the medicinal value. You know? And through your leadership, you know, you've built the foundation of science that we can now work off of. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for your leadership. It's legal now here in Massachusetts, and you know, there's a research license category now in the adult use framework. If you had any advice for a future researcher in cannabis, what would you give them, or what do you think we should study as these useful benefits?
Well, I think there are probably more medical uses for it than there are a lot of medical uses, but I think there are even more.
Really?
And they, you know, and medicine, organized medicine has to give its stamp of approval for this to be something that should be seriously looked into. As it is, it's, you know, you have to be peripheral people who are interested in it, and it really should be. Enough is known now to really take this seriously and see what part it should be playing in health. In health, not just medicine, but in health. Excuse me.
And do you think the federal government should take a leadership on that, or do you think it's more of the responsibility of the clinical populations?
Well, the federal government ultimately has to do it because things like licenses. I think when people come to pressure the federal government, they will say, hey, come on, let's take a look at this. You know, it's been maligned for so many years. Is it possible that it's really useful to us as a matter of health? Now that, you gotta have the federal government.
And it's fundamental. It's interesting that you say health, not even just disease state.
No, I mean health, yeah.
That's a very
That's why I
interesting
said I'm
distinction.
not, certainly there are certain diseases where, you know, you'd have to be a real dummy not to see how useful it is there, but I'm talking about health in general.
Well, thank you for your leadership. And it's a very honor to meet you, and it's an honor to be here. And we'll work to try and take research and continue forward. Just really appreciate the time.
Well, I'll shake on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the man and still is in his early 90s. And thank you very much to Peter and Liz for welcoming us into their home and letting us have a viewing party afterwards with Dad, and Mom. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Next, I'd like to introduce Randy McCaffrey. He is the co-founder of the Cannabis Care Community Care and Research Network. And I'm gonna have him take it away. Thanks.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for being here. I want to say thank you to Lester and Betsy, they're amazing, and to Peter and Liz for having us at their home, it was wonderful. Now we have Dr. Peter Grinspoon, MD, is the author of Free Refills, A Doctor Confronts His Addiction. He's a primary care physician at MGH in Boston, a former associate director for the Massachusetts Physician Health Service, and an instructor in medicine at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Grinspoon currently practices as a primary care physician at an inner city clinic in Boston and is on staff at Massachusetts General Hospital. He teaches medicine at Harvard Medical School. He spent 2 years as an associate director for the Physician Health Service, part of the Massachusetts Medical Society, working with physicians who suffer from substance use disorders. Dr. Grinspoon graduated with honors in philosophy from Swarthmore College Before medical school, he spent 5 years as a campaign director at Greenpeace, working on the Nuclear-Free Seas campaign. He attended medical school at Boston University School of Medicine. His internship and residency were in internal medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Today, he is proudly 10 years clean. He lives in Newton, Mass. With his wife, Liz Grinspoon, and his blended family. So, without any further ado, Dr. Peter Grinspoon.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks to Mary and Steve, Randy. Very excited to be here. It's interesting seeing my dad on screen. He does really well for 90 years old. 90's old. Maybe he saw the cannabis he's been smoking. Who knows? Anyways, I've got obviously a lot of personal connections to this issue. One, growing up with my dad, being a cannabis activist for so long, I've been involved in this issue in utero. I'm a little bit tired of these stories, but I know they're very powerful and helpful for everybody else. And I just remember, this issue popping up everywhere. Going out to ice cream after dinner with my family at EMAC and Bolio's and having my dad get into heated discussion with another physician, who's like this savagely sort of attacking him about his position on cannabis. And my dad just enraging this other doctor. They're very collegial discussion, but my dad just saying, well, it's actually more dangerous for an adult to drink a glass of whole milk than to smoke a joint of marijuana, which is actually technically true. And this other doctor just going berserk. It just did not compute. And I also have another connection just because, and anybody knows a little bit more about my family, my older brother Danny, when I was 8, died of leukemia. And the only thing that kept him sort of maintaining weight for the last couple of years was medical cannabis. We didn't have Zofran back then, and Compazine wasn't working for him. He was on very intensive chemotherapy. And so I knew for a fact, firsthand witness, that medical cannabis works. And then I decided to become a doctor after being a philosophy major and working for Greenpeace and doing a bunch of other stuff. And I've, just dealt with physicians who think medical cannabis doesn't work at all. And this has been a very bizarre experience because I know that it works. It's not a randomized controlled trial, but I actually saw it work in my own family. Like in the same way that you drop an apple and it hits the ground, you see that gravity works. So I've been working on that with other physicians. I'm a board member of this group, Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. We're really trying to reach out to other physicians. And, this doctor that I work with in my clinic is a great doctor, a friend of mine, really compassionate primary care doctor, great in the opiate issue. He just said at a meeting about 6 years ago, there's absolutely nothing we could treat with medical cannabis that we can't treat with other medications. Completely, utterly against it. But of course, he's had me browbeating him for the last 6 years. And now he's a huge medical cannabis activist, and not activist, advocate, and he's going to get certified, and he refers patients to me all the time. So people can grow and change. I think part of the problem is, if you grow up in a small county in the middle of the country and they only teach you that the earth is flat, you grow up as an adult and you think the earth is flat. And it's not entirely your fault. That's just the only thing you've been exposed to. And in medical schools, they only teach the endocannabinoid system, this whole neurotransmitter system, which is like profoundly important in the brain, in the immune system. It's how the cannabinoids, how cannabis works on the body. They only teach it in 13% of medical schools. I mean, this is really bizarre. And the stuff in our medical school textbooks was, reads out of like a 1950s propaganda book. So we really need to reach out to and educate physicians because it's really interesting. 90% of Americans are in favor of medical cannabis, but something like 50 or 60% of physicians are in favor of it. So physicians are coming around, but they're way behind the patients. And it's been really interesting how patients are leading the charge on this. And I'm getting a little bit off topic, but they asked me to discuss where we have come and the clinical needs now for advancing medical cannabis and opiate addiction recovery and for end-of-life care. And where we've been and where we've come. When I was a kid, cannabis was flatly illegal. The medical uses were hardly recognized at all. And it was so widely stigmatized. And we had the government and these advocacy groups like Partnership for Drug-Free America. They were just going amok with these anti-cannabis propaganda campaigns. And now, prohibition is still a really, really big fight, and a lot of challenges remain, which I'll discuss if we have time. But it's pretty remarkable that we're here discussing opening access for veterans. We're here talking about making Massachusetts a research hub, hopefully for the whole world, and that I'm in my clinic allowed to certify patients and treat patients with it. So on the one hand, we should have been able to do all that all along, and it's a whole complicated sordid history about why we haven't been able to do that. But on the other hand, it's really amazing what progress we're making. So it is really a brave new world now that I'm really excited to be a part of. I personally have a third connection to this person, is that I am in recovery from opiate addiction, and that's why I got involved with physician health services and helping other physicians with addiction. And I think that cannabis does have a phenomenally large role to play in addressing our current opiate addiction. It's starting to be recognized. 3 states actually have exchange programs where you could take your Illinois and a couple others. We could take your prescription and exchange it for cannabis prescription, which is really intelligent. There are a bunch of ways where it unquestionably can help with the opiate crisis. You could use it as a painkiller instead of opiates. You can use it to transition people off of opiates, or you could use it to lower people's dose of opiates. They've seen that you could lower, people need about 20% of the dose of opiates if they co-use it with cannabis because they work on the same receptors. And given that a lot of the trouble you get into with opiates, overdoses and so forth, are dose related, if you could cut the dose down by 80%, that's really phenomenal. The other ways are, it is really good for withdrawal symptoms if someone's coming off of opiates. And a lot of the addiction people are like, well, look, there's no evidence of that. And it's like anybody who's ever used it for withdrawal symptoms can tell you that it works. And then, but you can't study it. They're like, well, it's unethical to study it. Well, we can't say that there's no evidence and it's unethical to study. It's like, so what are we supposed to do? And everybody says that it works. So they sort of put you in a box. It's a little bit complicated. I find the addiction psychiatrists are sort of the biggest bastion of resistors in terms of coming around to medical cannabis. Not all of them, but just in general. The other people are the pain specialists because they love to give injections. So they hate medical cannabis because it takes away their business. As Upton Sinclair said, it's very hard to get someone to understand something if their income depends on not understanding it. I'm probably butchering the quote, but the addiction psychiatrists are very difficult. But a new study came out which is making some of them change their minds. And it's really interesting to see people who can change their minds in addition to, kind of and incorporate new data versus people who kind of stick to the drug war mentality. It's just really fascinating to me to see that. But this study that came out is pretty revolutionary. I'm not going to bore you guys with slides with a lot of studies. There are only 3 studies that I'm going to cite. And it says that high intensity cannabis use is associated with retention in opiate agonist treatment, a longitudinal analysis. And the conclusion was that among people who use illicit drugs, initiating opiate agonist treatment, like Suboxone, buprenorphine, to get off heroin or fentanyl, at least daily cannabis use was associated with approximately 21% greater odds of retention in treatment compared with less than daily cannabis consumption. So, they were kicking people out of Suboxone programs for testing positive for cannabis. I said, why do we even test for cannabis? At Boston Medical Center, they don't test for cannabis. Why do we test for cannabis at MGH? And they got rid of the THC in some of the drug screens, not in all of them. But here, actually, you could argue you should test for cannabis to see that they're taking it because it increases their retention. And a couple of the addiction people actually said, I'm going to get certified. So they actually went from being drug warriors to being agnostic. Now they're going to get certified to potentially prescribe cannabis. That's really open-minded. I was really impressed. And then others are still digging in, the evil weed, you take a puff, your legs fall off. So there's a wide spectrum of sort of ability to be open-minded on this issue. It's really pretty amazing. The final issue with addiction and cannabis is very controversial. It's whether or not you could use cannabis as medication-assisted therapy instead of methadone or Suboxone or Vivitrol, whether you could use cannabis. I don't recommend that people do that just because it's a little bit risky. If I treat someone with a migraine and it doesn't work with cannabis, they get a migraine. So I try something else. But if I try to treat them for addiction and it doesn't work, they could overdose and die. So until there's more evidence, I don't recommend that for people. And that was one of the indications in some of the exchange programs, Cannabis for Opiates, and that got very heavily criticized. Now, they need to study this, and there's no ethical way to study this. So I don't know how they're going to establish this. And a lot of patients are using it. So you're sort of in the dilemma where patients are using it. You don't want to discourage them if they're using it, because who wouldn't want to be in cannabis rather than Suboxone or methadone? It's safer, and you don't have to, get drug tested all the time, see your doctor every week, be treated like a criminal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, you don't really want to recommend it because there's no data, and if something bad happens, you feel really bad. So we're in a little bit of a dilemma about that particular indication. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years, this were one of the medications we're using to get people off heroin. But right now, it's a little bit iffy sort of recommending it. So people ask me, and I just say I can't really recommend it. A lot of people use it. A lot of people have reported success. It certainly helps with withdrawal symptoms. I can tell you personally, when I was getting off opiates, it helped me a ton with withdrawal symptoms. Not way more than any of the hyped up pharmaceuticals that they have approved for it. But for actual substitution, you can't quite recommend it yet. Sorry, I have a big sign in my office that says, without caffeine, I have no personality whatsoever. So, and then, people say it's the alcohol speaking. For me, it's the caffeine speaking. And then finally, in terms of end-of-life care, these are all like really long subjects, so I'm kind of going over briefly. But end-of-life care is sort of the most obvious indication for cannabis, because A, if you want to argue there are long-term consequences, who cares? It's end-of-life care. And second of all, the symptoms that you're using are the obvious symptoms that cannabis treats, not sort of the controversial symptoms, but intractable nausea and vomiting associated with chemotherapy or radiotherapy, weight loss, anorexia, cachexia, severe intractable pain, mood, anxiety, and insomnia. And so not only have they been finding with palliative care that cannabis is really, really effective for these things, it also, most importantly, decreases the number of some medications used by this patient population. That's sort of an understatement. It decreases a lot of the medications they use, and most importantly, it decreases the opiates. So in their precious last few months of life, instead of being like zonked out on morphine and fentanyl, they're like more conscious to spend meaningful time with their family. It's really a gift for them to be able to use cannabis. And the main obstacle to this is the physicians who aren't educated about it. So that's why we have a lot of work to do educating the physicians on the benefits of cannabis. Is it safe in the elderly? A study came out from Israel with 2,736 patients above 65 years of age, and they used it for pain and for cancer, and it was really pretty amazing. The reported pain level was reduced from a median of 8 on a scale of 8 to 10 to a median of 4. I mean, that's amazing for pain. And there were very few side effects. 9% reported dizziness. And after 6 months, 18.1% stopped using opiate analgesics or reduced their dose. So not only can it help with the opiate crisis in general, but for elderly people, they fall, they get delirium, they get constipated. This sounds like not a big deal, but for elderly people, that's like a disaster. Because they're sort of constipated anyways. They end up in the emergency room. So, it's very safe in the elderly. And then specifically with palliative care, there's another study out of Israel. Again, Israel, Canada, Europe, they're studying it, and we have these preposterous restrictions in this country, which hopefully will be lifted when we get a change of administration, or if the Democrats are able to push something through. But this other study came out of Israel, and it was specifically studying palliative care for cancer patients. It studied breast, pancreatic, colorectal, and lung cancer patients. The median age was 60 years old. And they found that 95.9% of patients treated with medical cannabis for palliative care reasons reported an improvement in their condition. Like 95.9%, that's unbelievable. Show me any medical treatment where 95.9% of people show an improvement in their condition. And the conclusion was that cannabis as a palliative care treatment seemed to be well-tolerated, effective, and safe option to help patients cope with malignancy-related symptoms. So I just think we're really behind. We have this treatment that's like really profoundly underutilized. And we're really in a brave new world in the sense that A, we now have access to it for patients that we didn't before. And B, in terms of research, which I'm really excited about this new group, because we're going to be funneling a lot of research from Massachusetts. We're in a brave new world about what these different cannabinoids can do. During Prohibition, the cannabis was bred to be very high in THC, which is great if you want to get high, write a book, go dancing, or go to a party. or paint. But for medical uses, now they're starting to bring back the different cannabinoids, like, CBD everybody knows about. I'm not going to talk about that. But like THCV is very exciting, a possibility for controlling appetite, weight loss, and diabetes. Like 80% of Americans are overweight, and diabetes is epidemic. And if we have, a cannabinoid that can lower weight and control blood sugar, that's revolutionary. That's infinite in terms of healthcare savings and human misery. So I think we're just at the beginning of a brave new world. As we start teaching doctors about the endocannabinoid system, young doctors, medical students and residents are writing op-eds and they're clamoring for more education. So I really think this is going to start to change. Obstacles remain. I mean, it's legal in Massachusetts, both medically and recreationally, but there are still 40 states where adult use marijuana is illegal, and people are still getting arrested. The arrests are still racially disproportionate. People are going to prison, and there are still about 15 states that don't even have medical access. And even in Massachusetts, where you have medical access, a lot of my patients can't afford it. Like I'm in Chelsea, insurance doesn't pay for it. So I finally certify someone, and they come back and they say, "Hey, it worked great, but how am I supposed to afford $100 a month for these drops?" It's just absolutely impossible. So there are still a lot of obstacles. What we're working on today is veterans still don't have access to it, which is a disaster. I mean, I see a lot of veterans in my primary care practice just because they get the cold shoulder from the VA, which is completely ridiculous. But I know we're going to talk more about that. And other challenges are the sort of the corporatization of the medical cannabis industry. I know Shalene Title is here, and she works on that. It's really interesting. It just seems to be losing some of its flavor. We've fighting for 40 years to legalize cannabis, and then people come in from the tobacco and alcohol industry and sort of take over. And they say the right things about wellness, but they don't seem to really care that much about social justice and fixing the wrongs of the past. So it is really complicated. And the prohibition movement is still very active. People are acting like legalization is a fait accompli, but there's still a huge fight going on across the board on every single level. So I just don't want people to become complacent. I could talk about that maybe during the panel, but the latest thing is people are talking about old versus new cannabis. They're like, oh, well, the old cannabis isn't that dangerous because there's only 3% THC, but now the new cannabis, which is 20% THC, is really dangerous. I'm like, it's the same thing, it's just stronger. You actually have to smoke less to get high. They're like, no, but it's stronger, it's new cannabis. I'm like, so scotch is more dangerous than beer because it's more concentrated, but it's the same molecule. They're like, it's new cannabis. I was just reading this debate that they had in the Marshall Project. And, I'm thinking of writing an editorial, like new cannabis means THCV and CBD and all these new medical treatments. New cannabis is a good thing. It's exciting. It's not just more red meat for prohibitionists. It's total BS. So anyways, we have a lot of work to do. I'm over my time. I don't want to get shot by the powers that be. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Commissioner Shalene Title, who was jointly appointed in 2017 by the Massachusetts Governor, Treasurer, and Attorney General to serve in the social justice seat on the commission. Named to the Boston Business Journal's 2018 list of the 50 most powerful people in Boston, she has won several awards for her advocacy work and her efforts to bring more women and people of color to drug policy reform in the cannabis industry. Before her appointment, she co-authored the Massachusetts marijuana legalization referendum and has consulted on state and local marijuana policy around the country. As an attorney specializing in marijuana regulations, she has provided regulatory expertise for leading marijuana consulting firms. She also served as founder of a woman-led recruiting firm and is founding board member of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, where she led the drafting of the first model bill created to give states guidance to implement a process of reinvestment and reconciliation. She previously served on the national boards of Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Marijuana Majority, the Cannabis Law and Family Alliance, and the National Lawyers Guild. Welcome to the stage, Commissioner Shalene Title.
Hi,
everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me here to be able to support this wonderful project. I'm such a fan of Veterans for Alternative Healing and to C3RN. And I have to just take a minute to really say, Dr. Miriam McNabb, Randy as well, and Stephen Mandley, how much I appreciate you and the work that you do, and how much I strive to be like you, and in difficult times to think about people like you. So for those of you who don't know, regulatory changes on the commission level or at any regulatory agency, you can't make them whenever you want. You have to do them in these big batches. And it's a very stressful first few months where you start with doing listening sessions and hearings. Next week we have hearings on Tuesday and Wednesday. Then you draft regulations, then you take more feedback, then you finalize the regulations. So we're in the middle of that right now. I've been thinking a lot about where change comes from. I'm approaching now 15 years in this movement, starting in Illinois on medical cannabis and then working through to legalization initiatives. And these days, my primary focus tends to be on social justice and diversity and equity generally. But that absolutely includes the legal mandates that we have in the law for veterans in the industry. And we have legal mandates in the law for veterans to be able to access medical cannabis as well. So I was asked to speak today about transparency and research and those efforts towards diversity and then medical access in cannabis. So I'll talk about those, and then I think we're running a little bit behind, but if we have time, I'm happy to take some questions. So as part of the Cannabis Control Commission's mission statement, we are fully committed to transparency. And even if we didn't want to, we would have to be. We're subject to open meeting law, so I can't talk to my colleagues unless it's at an open meeting. So people will sometimes ask me, what does the commission think about this? What's the commission going to do about that? And I don't know the answer. It really happens at our meeting based on public feedback and from the feedback of organizations like this. So you can have a huge impact when you're part of a network and you are willing to have the vulnerability and the courage and the bravery that you see from the people who are on the panel today, the people who are leading this network. And I can say too, as a regulator, when I talk to people who say the same things, whether they're speaking in public or whether they're speaking to me behind closed doors in a lobbying meeting, or whether they are talking to someone who's at an event for the first time that wants to be mentored, from these organizers, I'm always hearing the same thing. It's about how do we help veterans, about how to make sure that we're doing research in a way that's fair, that's going to make Massachusetts lead the world in terms of data and in terms of really understanding the impacts of legalization. So you already may be familiar with the Commission's website where we have guidance documents. Dr. Grinspoon mentioned one of my areas of focus is trying to make sure we stick to the vision in Massachusetts that we have a diverse industry that is allowing people from all different backgrounds to have local companies that can have craft products, that can have control over the company, that are keeping profits in their communities and reinvesting them. So our guidance documents explain how exactly we will do that and what limitations and regulations all of our applicants and licensees and businesses in Massachusetts are subject to. You can also read the minutes from our meetings so that you can tailor your feedback to what we're working on. And some of you may also be aware that we have now contracted with a business called Socrata, which provides an open data solution. And what that means is all of this data that we're collecting, running a state legal program, it shouldn't be sitting on our government computers. It should be available to everybody so that people like Dr. McNabb and people like all the doctors here can access that data and work with it, combine it with your own surveys that you're doing, and we can all do better that way. So we've contracted with that company. We'll have open data available soon. And then in terms of my own areas of focus, other than social equity, I'm also leading on social consumption. we have a working group that is made up of commissioners and then leading local officials from all over the state. Our first meeting is supposed to be tomorrow. We'll see what happens with the snow. But when we think about pilot programs, so social consumption and delivery will likely be pilot program-ish. We collect data and then we can know what are the actual concerns with these programs versus concerns that may be hypothetical. So efforts towards diversity generally. So currently the commission has approved 118 provisional licenses. And you can look at the diversity in two ways: by certified women, minority, veteran-owned businesses, or self-reporting. I like to look at certified businesses. They're called certified disadvantaged business enterprises, because what that means is the state agency that's in charge of this, the Office of Supplier Diversity, has checked the business to make sure that it's actually owned by who they say it's owned by, versus just holding someone up as a prop and then taking away all of the profits. Self-reporting is also important because if you haven't had the time to go through that process, you can still say, I'm a woman, I own this business. So both sets of data are really bad right now, but we're very early. So 118 licenses, only 10 stores have now been allowed to open by the commission. So at our last meeting, I said, can we please stop and have a discussion about what is not working and what we're going to do differently so that our next 100 licensees don't look like this. And so everyone on the commission came through, had great ideas. One of the things that we're exploring is breaking up the application process so that we can have an initial process that allows certain applicants to show that they may be qualified to run a business through their policies, their procedures, their possible location, their possible sources of capital, but then they can show that that was checked. And then they can move on to, say, the local process and to raise capital. So that's one thing we're looking at. We're also taking feedback. As I mentioned, we have hearings next week. We really want to hear about the barriers that people are facing so that we can address them directly. And the rest of the country and the rest of the world is looking to Massachusetts as the first state that has these mandates and the first state to be struggling through the process of adjusting, stopping, looking at the data and adjusting, because that is how you make change. So we'll continue to monitor our progress. I do want to repeat one thing I said in the last meeting, which is that I do often hear just out there people saying, well, we always knew it was going to look like this. We always knew the business was just going to be white men. You know, they're already controlling it. Like, it's all rigged, it's all corrupt. I understand that temptation, but keep in mind that the people who want to be, say, the Starbucks of marijuana, and by the way, Starbucks of marijuana is the one I always hear. And they're like, how can a little indie coffee shop compete with Starbucks? Okay, so coffee does not have a regulation where you can only own up to 3 of any coffee shop, and marijuana does, so that's the difference. But the people who want to be the Starbucks of marijuana, they have a vested interest in having that perception out there so that people give up, so they don't come to the hearing, so they don't keep fighting, so they don't keep trying to get licenses. So if you hear that, be skeptical. So another good thing that's in the law is accountability. So if our commission does not succeed in terms of our diversity mandates, in terms of making sure veteran-owned businesses are included, and in terms of making sure that veterans have the access that they need to medical cannabis, we have to stop and take remedial measures. And what that means for any of you who consider yourself advocates is you don't have to convince anybody of anything. It's already in the law. That battle has been won. So you just have to hold the government accountable for what they're already required to do. So I really look forward to the research to come out of this new initiative. I know we'll make sure that we're supporting all of the data that we can and making sure that's available, that we're responding to all of the new data that you bring us. I want to close with a couple of the policies that I personally can commit to supporting. One is that, of course, patients should not have to pay at the government level. No patient should have to. If you have a debilitating condition, then it is your fundamental human right, I believe, to be able to get health care, and of course, to be able to go through the process to get a patient card. But if that applies to anybody, of course, that applies to veterans who have those debilitating conditions because they have put their own lives on the line for the rest of us. Let me say too, what I really admire about some of the organizers here is that I think they understand, we all know where we need to be, and in this case, it's that no patients should have to pay fees, and you have to stand for that, but you also have to understand that it takes time to pull things in the right direction. And it's great to see Dr. Lester Grinspoon up there saying that how good it is for him to see everything that he has worked on decades later, but for him to also be talking about the professorship and say, I don't really care. Because what a great thing to not care about who gets the credit or about what exactly it looks like, but to know that you're pulling things in the right direction and that they're moving steadily. And we can see that happening. So that is patient fees. We're going to fight to make sure that nobody pays fees, but especially veterans. And then I think of my home state of Illinois, actually, I think they're a model in a lot of ways. There's a couple of activists that have been working on this for more than 10 years, Ali Najib and Dan Lin. And I think that one of the models that we should try and follow is that if a veteran has a condition from the VA, they don't have to then go to an additional doctor to get a recommendation and pay for that and not have insurance and really do a redundant process. Instead, they can just show that they have the diagnosis of that particular condition. So I think that's something to work towards. Also, as I'm sure other experts will talk about in more detail, I think it makes sense to look into the option of if a doctor is not comfortable recommending cannabis, for them to be able to show that I would have otherwise recommended opioids, and maybe that means they should be able to access cannabis like they have in Illinois and a couple of other states. So we'll continue to support those models. We'll continue to advocate for, of course, changes at the federal level, fee discounts or waivers for veterans who register as qualifying patients in Massachusetts, and discount programs, which most dispensaries have. We're going to make sure that they continue to have that. And I thank you. I see everyone here as a partner. I want to thank you for your initiative and putting this together and for being here. This is absolutely where change comes from. And congratulations for all of your work getting us here and in the progress we'll soon see. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Lynn. Up next, we have Jan Roberts. Jan Roberts is a recognized leader and clinician in the field of cannabis and mental health. Ms. Roberts is a licensed clinical social worker, the founder and CEO of Partners in Health and Wellbeing, one of the largest multi-site mental health and wellness private practices in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. Ms. Roberts became interested in cannabis effects after seeing how cannabis was helpful in improving the lives of some of her clients who had experienced little help from traditional medications. After seeing her own cases improve, Ms. Roberts embarked on a path to further her understanding of cannabis and its impact on mental health, and to provide objective information and advocate for its healthy use. As a result of her clinical work, Ms. Roberts joined Dr. Jehan Marcoux in forming the International Research Center on Cannabis and Mental Health, a collaborative research institute located in New York that bridges university and community-based projects across the globe on cannabis and mental health. Ms. Roberts is the Chief Executive Officer and Director of Translational Research for this group, founded in 2017, which has become a recognized objective leader in cannabis research, design, education, and consultation. Ms. Roberts teaches at the NYU Silver School of Social Work, where she will be awarded her doctorate in May 2019, and at CUNY Hunter College's Silverman School of Social Work. In addition to her academic roles, Ms. Roberts is a governor-appointed member of the Delaware Medical Marijuana Act Advisory Committee, and she's the current guest editor for the Clinical Social Work Journal, upcoming special issue on cannabis and mental health, which we hope to be in. Most recently, Ms. Roberts joined Dr. Jehan Marku and comedian actor Greer Barnes, creating a weekly podcast titled New Hemp Times, which is dedicated to providing accurate analysis and commentary around cannabis research, policy issues, and its social impact in a smart, yet approachable, and often convenient way. Ms. Roberts lives in New York and sees patients at her private practice in Manhattan. So without further ado, Jen Roberts.
Heavens, I have to say, I don't think I need to say anything anymore. You kind of did it. Thank you all for having me today. And I'm going to talk about a few things, and the slides really aren't necessarily exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. But essentially, as Randy mentioned, I am a clinical social worker. I own a very large private practice in the Mid-Atlantic area where we see 16,000 patients a year. And my colleague, who couldn't be here today, Jehan Marku, it sounds like some of you already know Jehan, he is also kind of a rock star in this field, having been in cannabis for about 20 years. And he and I decided that we saw a huge gap in what was happening from a research perspective. And the journey we started is definitely not where we are right now, because it keeps evolving. This is a crazy industry, guys. As you all know, is that it's changing daily, and we have to keep up with it. So essentially, what we decided we wanted to do was to change the way that people think and talk about cannabis. As a clinician, I was raised, if you will, to think of cannabis as a pathological substance, although I had used it in college, high school, and still as an adult. And found, my training kind of made me think that anyone who uses the substance actually would fit into cannabis use disorder. And for me, it was really important to kind of debunk the myths around this. So we decided to start this research institute to focus on mental health issues. And we wanted to create something that would actually make a more meaningful change. To me, research is important, but if you don't act on that research, and this is the social worker in me, if I don't act on that research, then what's the use of that? So we see ourselves with IRC-CMH kind of as the same voice in an insane cannabis world, because there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much, I see it all the time, just by nature of social media, really poorly designed studies being promoted as if they were the gospel. Cannabis does not cure everything. It makes a wonderful difference in the lives of some of its users and many of its users, but we really need to be able to look at cannabis objectively. So one of the things that we decided to focus on is research, but also education and advocacy. Whoops, I went too fast. So for research, one of the things for research that we know is that most of the research on mental health has been on animal models. Most of the research in general regarding cannabis is on physical illnesses. And as I got into this, and Mary and I have had these conversations, like there was such little data out there about what did it mean to the patients. I knew in my practice, I was seeing incredible outcomes with people with PTSD, with clients who had anorexia, clients who had other kind of traumatic issues going on, that there was something that had to be done. And so we wanted to kind of create this environment. We know that clients use, or anyone uses cannabis for many reasons. Most of the reasons are for pain, anxiety, and depression. And this is where I get hung up on the word recreational use, to be honest with you, because to me, it's all therapeutic use. To me, it's about feeling better. It's about handling stress. It's about having a sense of well-being. And that is something that I think that if my clients, I drive them crazy with this, because to me, it's all about the language we use. So I'm a huge proponent of changing recreational cannabis use to therapeutic use, because really, when you ask people, the majority of the people who use cannabis, that's why they're using it. And another thing is that research out there, because of political agendas, have never really been focused on healthy use of cannabis. It's so quick to identify pathological use, but so slow to really look at what does healthy use look like. You know, I have to tell you, I remember as a kid getting in trouble in high school when my parents found the joints that I had in my closet, and now my mom just loves the fact that I'm doing this because we've had deaths in our family due to opioids. My father was addicted to opioids because of severe pain issues and the struggles that he had with constipation for 20 years. His whole personality changed, and we have this opportunity now to really kind of change that. One of the things too is we don't really talk about the endocannabinoid system and its impact on mood regulation, and that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and we have several projects going on about that, and I'll talk in a minute. But then people don't know also about standardized products and the need for standardized products. Whenever I have a client coming in who's getting their cannabis from a neighbor, I'm all about, nope, we have to do it the legal way, because I need to make sure you're using safe products and that we know what kind of products that you're using as well. And so for us, IRC CMH was started to kind of not reinvent the wheel. We all have subject matter experts in this country who focus on specific areas related to cannabis. Our goal was to actually engage all of those incredible researchers to kind of build a network across the world of people who are specialists in their areas. And we've done that, and every day it kind of seems like it's growing daily. And the big thing too is that people talk about cannabis as if it's one drug. It is not one drug. It's a compound. And we need to quit assuming that, especially in research, and this is one of my biggest issues, is that we do all this research on cannabis, but we really don't know from a molecular level, what are we talking about? What were the cannabinoids in this? What does this cannabinoid do to this part of your brain, you know? And so these are some of the reasons why we decided to get IRC CMH off the ground. There we go. So this is the cool part of what I do. So these are all the topics we're actually working on right now. We have a project with professional athletes that we're looking at their medications, prescribed medications. We're looking at their cannabis use. We're looking at their, it's in process right now, so I can't really tell you what the data is showing, but it's actually looking at even their sexual functioning, their sleep, because no one talks about sexual functioning. The biggest reason people get off of SSRIs or other antidepressants is because of sexual side effects. And because of my clinical use and knowing kind of, well, I have like 7 sex therapists on staff, so this is an area very interesting to us. And so we're looking at sexual functioning. We have a project right now with veterans that we were trying to have it in Delaware, but unfortunately supply issues have been, I think for any researcher, that's always the biggest issue that we run into. We know that patients run into it as well, but to guarantee a standardized type of medication for this trial, we couldn't do that there. So luckily, we've just partnered with a group in New York that we have guaranteed standardized supply that we're going to be following with our veterans. And we're also going to be looking at cannabis use among the veterans. We have several interventions that we're putting in, so we'll be able to kind of see if our interventions actually impact usage as well. Because at the end of the day, we also want to promote healthy usage of cannabis just because of the impact on the endocannabinoid system. Another area is I did a pilot study on mental health clinicians last spring. And it's actually gotten funded to go global, and it's a much larger study that's in process right now, where we are asking mental health clinicians, what do they know, what do they not know about cannabis? Because as it was alluded to earlier, addiction psychiatry is typically, you know, has seen this as a pathological use and has seen any kind of substance as a way that people are harming themselves. And for me, I have seen, again, in my practice what's happened, but this is fascinating. From the pilot study that we collected data on, what we found was that it actually, you know, the mental health clinicians, depending on their education level, that impacted whether or not they were more likely to recommend cannabis for their clients. They were also more likely to recommend it for physical reasons rather than for mental health reasons like anxiety or even PTSD. Out of the mental health symptoms that people had, they were more likely to see it as a helper for PTSD, but things like anorexia, anxiety, things like, I'm trying to think of all the variables that we had so many, so even other substance use issues, even opioid use disorder, they weren't very supportive of that. One of the things we also learned about mental health clinicians is that if they ever tried it before or used it in the past, they knew that it wasn't so scary, and they were more apt to recommend it to their clients. So we're doing some more work around that. We're hoping, I can't wait to see what this next round of data is going to do, but it's really kind of exciting. One of the areas too is that we're looking at head trauma and trying to see kind of what's going on related to that. I can't really kind of talk much about that right now. But as a clinician, what I would like to see, and we are measuring this with our athletes, is looking at how cannabis impacts benzodiazepine use. We talk about opioids a lot, but for those of you who don't know what a benzodiazepine is, that's Klonopin, Ativan, Xanax, and these drugs are highly, highly physically addictive. And in fact, more people use benzos than opioids. And psychiatrists are easy to prescribe benzos. They're quick to prescribe benzos. And that is one of the areas we have to look at, because benzos are used to help people with anxiety disorders, and we need to be able to see if cannabis can help mitigate that piece as well. Now, I have to tell you, education is huge for me, because again, I find that a lot of consumers have very little education about cannabis. In the states where I work, in one state, we have it so that the patient advocates or bud tenders are the ones making medical decisions for clients. That is incredibly problematic. I had a client, for example, who she had been hospitalized 21 times. She was 45 years old and had anorexia since she was 12. And cannabis, she started using cannabis, and she went to the dispensary to get it. They never told her anything. They recommended her use certain varieties. And she started taking Klonopin with it because it was so activating for her anxiety. And when I heard, she came to me afterwards, and when I heard about that, I was like, oh God, no. And those are some of the issues that patients are facing every day. They don't understand because the infrastructure is not there to provide them this kind of information. And so we were able, consequently, to get her on another variety that she didn't need that, and it was actually very helpful. And she hasn't been in the hospital for about 1.5 years, which is incredible for this client. Another thing is that we present all the time, not just for consumers, but for patients, for professionals as well, because one of my passions is to dispel this myth for mental health practitioners. There are so many myths around cannabis that it's just mind-boggling. Have you heard of Alex Berenson's book, Tell Your Children? Well, I have to tell you, one of the best things about, oops, I'm gonna skip to this. One of the best things, these guys down here, so we have this podcast called New Hemp Times, and please, it's on iTunes, Spotify, go check it out. We have 5 episodes, but we're using a global way of educating people. This podcast, we're challenging Alex Berenson to come on it, and we keep, I don't want to say troll, that's the wrong word, but some of the stuff that he's done is so scary to me. We actually, my friend Greer, the guy next to me, he's an actor and comedian. He's on Crashing on HBO and used to write for the Chappelle Show, and was on the Chappelle Show. And Greer knows Pete Davidson. If you read this book, Alex Berenson calls out Pete Davidson as actually being an example of how cannabis can make you crazy and volatile. And so we're trying to really kind of use our platform that is actually based on true scientific data to kind of dispel a lot of these myths around cannabis. Part of our topics have been about the endocannabinoid system, because Jayon and I are such nerds and such geeks. We can totally get like in our nerd space, But we're really trying to make it approachable for everyone so that they can learn more about what cannabis is. Because I want my patients, I want everyone to go into the dispensary and say, I don't care if it's about indica or sativa. What's the cannabinoid profile of this strain or this variety? That's what we want to do. We want people to understand that we want them to have a healthy functioning endocannabinoid system, not a dysregulated one. And for me as a clinician, that tells me that my clients aren't abusing it. You know, I teach them about what does taking too much do to you, because you really want to pay attention to this. So cannabis can actually help you. It can help you lead a vital life. You know, I know I'm very open about my own use because for me, it's about dispelling the myths. I don't know many more people more like motivated to do things than me. And my mom and I joke about it because, you know, she's 80 and gray hair and all that. And I'm like, remember those days? And she just is like, yeah, my daughter's a smart cannabinoid now. You know, so she's learning all about it. We've done things related to like CBD products. We actually created a consumer warning for people. There were some studies out of Virginia Commonwealth talking about the actual counterfeit CBD that's widely available, that has all these contaminants in it, that people think that they're using this product to help themselves, to relieve their anxiety, not knowing what in the world is in this product. And it's actually causing more harm than good. And it is our obligation. I feel very strongly that if I have this knowledge, it is my job to teach my patients and to teach the world what we can do. I do believe that cannabis is a way to positively impact well-being. You hear me talk a lot about health, and I want people to understand that this is a new way of seeing what well-being can be. So these are just some of our partnerships that we have for research. We have projects, we're about to do a project in Latin America, we've got one in Canada and Australia, we've got several here in the US. Jahan, we do everything from working with states and the regulations, with medically accepted conditions. We actually work with the labs as well. So we're kind of like the hub where we bring experts in to kind of change the way we think about cannabis. And we've been featured in these publications as well. And I'm so excited. There's our little logo. The cuter logo for New York Times is so much cuter. It's like a little cartoon of the three of us. So it's kind of funny. But anyway, please do listen to it because it actually is cool. And tell your friends. But anyway, that's it. And so thank you so much.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. We're a little over, which is totally okay. And we welcome you to have some refreshments, nourish yourself. We have a stellar panel coming up in about 40 minutes. So self-care, self-relax, and we'll welcome you here in about half hour, 40 minutes. So thank you to the speakers again. Thank you. We're gonna probably have you sit up there. And Jen in the back. Yeah, so Marion's gonna sit like this, so you can maybe see. Marion, you'll see this, and this will be like monitoring whatever you need. And
You're gonna bribe me back.
yeah, she can like electronically, so she just needs a clear vision.
I should be able to. Usually do.
All right,
Even if I need to
go ahead and
tilt my
invite
chair
the
over.
speakers up to the front.
Yeah,
would that be better?
no, I'm kind of early. I might enter my chair a little bit. Is that right?
Okay.
We're not going up to the podium, right?
No, yeah. Pretty good with your side?
Yeah, thanks.
What was that, Tracy?
Yeah.
Being for an hour. Peter will have you come sit up here, please. And Jan is gonna be right around, and then Dr. Tracy. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Again, we're very thankful for the keynote speakers, Jan Roberts, Commissioner Title, as well as Peter Grinspoon. Thank you very much for that dialogue and that information. We very much appreciate it. We're going to move right into the panel here, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Mary McNabb here, the co-founder of Cannabis Community Care and Research Network, and a badass in the scene, so I'm just gonna throw that in there. Dr. McNabb holds over 15 years of global health field experience implementing and evaluating sexual reproductive health and rights and technology-focused programs mainly in African countries, Vietnam and Haiti. Most recently, Marion consulted with UNICEF New York to draft a global approach for digital health for over 130 countries and consulted with Health Enabled, a global digital health consulting firm, advised the Ugandan and South African Ministry of Health on the use of digital tools to eliminate mother-to-child transmission of HIV. Dr. Mary McNabb is also the CEO and co-founder of the C3RN, the Cannabis Community Care and Research Network, a Massachusetts-based cannabis research company aiming to improve the evidence base related to medical cannabis therapies. C3RN runs a virtual cannabis center of excellence, leveraging digital technologies to improve collaboration and research partnerships between academic, clinical, and cannabis communities. C3RN, along with UMass Dartmouth, is leading a 2-year open cannabis consumer and patient research study to assess the impact on health, social, and economic outcomes. And in March 2019, C3RN will launch an open cannabis veterans and veterans family member research study with partners of UMass Dartmouth and Veterans Alternative Healing. C3RN VHJVC will co-host an event series in 2019 focused on science, education, and breaking cannabis stigma in Massachusetts through community engagement. And CPRN is an approved qualified training vendor for the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission's Social Equity Training Program. So thank you, Marion.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. Let's all give Ann a really big round of applause. Very grateful to work with Ann this year and Joint Venture Co. on this event and launch of the series. And very grateful to our esteemed panel. We're here and we're very grateful to have experts that start from pediatric to end-of-life care. And why we wanted to really focus on medical cannabis from all these different perspectives is just that underlying issue that Dr. Lester spoke about, Dr. Grinspoon spoke about in the video, that cannabis really maybe thinking about it as a health issue instead of focused on disease states. And so we're really trying to understand from these esteemed experts, from their opinions. We've asked them to prepare, give some background about who they are and what their area of work is, and to give us 3 areas of future advice and inquiry related to their expertise around medical cannabis. So I'll briefly introduce each of the panelists, then I'll ask each one to give some remarks, and we'll start from birth to end-of-life care. So we'll start with Dr. Eric Ruby. We're very, very honored to have Dr. Ruby here today. He's one of 2 board-certified pediatricians that recommend cannabis in Massachusetts. Dr. Ruby is a board-certified pediatrician who has served patients in Taunton, Massachusetts in both private practice as well as a staff member at Morton Hospital for over 41 years. As a native of Brooklyn, New York, Dr. Ruby is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and received his medical training from SUNY Downstate Medical Center, where he graduated with honors in pediatrics. He completed his internship, residency, and fellowship at Oakland Children's Hospital in Northern California, receiving national board certification in 1975. Following his tenure with Children's Hospital, he served as a solo pediatrician at George Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert. In 1977, Dr. Ruby began his own practice and quickly immersed himself in the life surrounding community. Over the years, his volunteer services included Head Start, Taunton Boys and Girls Club, Camp Danby for Girls, among others. A defining event in Dr. Ruby's life was a spinal cord injury suffered by his son, Ethan, in 2000, while he was struck in the middle of New York City crosswalk by an automobile. Dr. Ruby founded Massachusetts Walks Again in 2003, which has raised over $2 million to fund research and improve the quality of life for those with spinal cord injury. Thank you, Dr. His son's experience as a Colorado resident with the efficacy of medical cannabis for relief of his post-injury pain led to Dr. Ruby's involvement with this alternative medication. Dr. Ruby is a member of the Association of Cannabis Specialists. His professional, Dr. Ruby served as the chief of pediatrics at Morton Hospital from 1981 to 83, 87 to 89, 93 to 95, 2005 to 2009. And his professional associations include president of the Bristol North Chapter of Massachusetts Medical Society, member of the House of Delegates and the Legislative Committee. He's a member of the Massachusetts Chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and is a member of the National Chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. In 2007, Dr. Ruby was rightly selected as the MMS Community Physician of the Year, and he is a member of the American Medical Association. So thank you very much, Dr. Ruby, for being here. We can go ahead and start, and I'll introduce as we go.
Well, thank you for that introduction, because I didn't want to say all those things myself. But suffice to say that I'm a clinician, so I deal with people. And a long time ago, somebody says, "Oh, Dr. Ruby, I've known you now for a couple of years. You're a gem of a doctor." So that's tooting my own horn there. But, thank you, Beth, Marion, and Ann, and C3 for inviting me. I just listened to the Oscars, so I'm not going to thank everybody else. That's enough. I see light back in her face. She smiles more. I'm going to start my, because you told me I have 7 minutes. I see light back in her face. She smiles more. She is interested in things that are mentioned and places that she may go. She is not depressed anymore. I don't find her crying in her room anymore. That was one thing that broke my heart when I saw her in pain. I always knew she wasn't well and when she was having bad days. I would sense it and I would text her or knock on her door and I would find her crying. But she hasn't been going through that anymore since mid-December. Her dad and I are so grateful that this medication has helped her so much. She is so responsible with her doses. I honestly say now that this form of medication is the right one for her. That's what I'm hearing, and that's what you need to know. Cannabis saved my son's life. On November 29th, 2000, Ethan, who was then 25 years old, was hit by a car in New York City. He was paralyzed. He's now a T6 complete. His central neuropathic pain was treated by well-meaning physicians with opioids. He became addicted, and within 1 year, he decided that he was going to kill himself. Luckily, he was with a friend of his who was using cannabis for Crohn's disease. And by the way, that particular gentleman now is free of Crohn's disease, and he was told by his GI specialist he's never seen anyone ever become free of Crohn's disease without medication for Crohn's disease. So when Ethan said he was free of pain because of cannabis, he said, "Dad, this is the answer." I said, "Well, you cannot use it here in Massachusetts. The prisons are not wheelchair friendly, and I will get in a lot of trouble. You're gonna have to move to Colorado." So a couple weeks later, he told his mother and me that he was moving to Colorado, at which point she almost killed me. Because you don't send a 26-year-old out to Colorado who knows nothing about Colorado, is in a wheelchair, doesn't know where he's gonna live, and doesn't know what he's gonna do. Well, he started a grow facility, and it took him 3 years to get that grow facility the way he wanted it, and to find out that CBD was what he needed, full spectrum CBD. He moved back to Connecticut, where he was the founder of TheraPlant, which was the first licensed grow facility in Connecticut. He has a family, a wife, 2 children, drives a Mercedes, and has a nicer car than I have. I have to put this down now, so. This is the Constitution of the United States. It is 22 pages long. This is the regulation. 105 CMR 725. It is 52 pages long. Guidance for healthcare providers regarding the medicinal use of marijuana. 10 pages long. Medical use of marijuana online system, 17 pages long. Ability for a child to be able to get medicinal cannabis, 27 pages long. When I give this to the patient, I say, photocopy it and send it in, certified mail, return receipt request. They lose it. I am very concerned that when they said the medicinal marijuana program was going to be turned over to the Cannabis Commission and they're going to keep the same people, I said, oh my God, we need a change. We need a very big change. Thank goodness I went to a symposium that Nicole Snow put together on Massachusetts patient advocacy. 2019, year of the medicinal marijuana patient. I listened to Britt McBride, and she said she had 3 major components. Listen to the patient advocacy, expand research, and anticipate federal regulations. Britt McBride and Jennifer Flanagan, 2 people on the commission, spent 3 hours in my office on Wednesday. They took down a lot of notes. Actually, as I was talking, I could see her changing and Xing out things. We need to have things streamlined. I said, okay, let me talk to your points. Listen to patient advocacy. Change the attitude. Have faith in your job and respect of your job. And the people who work for your commission need to have respect for the patient. If you call a telephone number and it never picks up, you get discouraged. If it finally picks up after 25 minutes and somebody says, I can't help you, that's no good. If somebody says, I'll get back to you and never gets back to you, that's no good. You have to be responsive. If I didn't do this for my patients and call everybody back by the end of the day, I couldn't live with myself. Everybody in my office, in my practice, gets a call. It might be 10 o'clock at night, but they're going to get a call. So attitude is number one. With communication, if there's a problem with filling out the form, get back to that patient and say it. Don't send it to them. I'm going to go over.
Yeah.
Don't send it to them 2 weeks later. Send it to them right now. Be competent. Don't tell them, call your doctor, he's the one who's got to figure this out. No, they are supposed to figure it out. And $50 and a waiver, they shouldn't have to pay a dime more. They're disabled. Respect the fact that people are calling you because they want help. Listen to patient advocacy. Expand research. We've got to go from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 or be our own schedule. If the federal government doesn't do this, they're being controlled by money. Money from alcohol, from tobacco, and from pharmaceutical industry. This is ridiculous. And so if we want to be a model system for the country, I am very concerned about the dispensaries. We need to make sure that every bottle of concentrate or every leaf or whatever they get, capsules, says what they're getting. Cannabis, and I'm glad we're talking cannabis and not marijuana. Marijuana is an xenophobic situation. It's talking about Mexican drug lords. It's talking about something that William Randolph Hearst said, if you let a black man get marijuana, he'll rape your white daughter. I'd put him in jail right now. This is not reefer madness. This is a medication. And I like the fact that I heard that it's not only for disease, but it's also for health. And we were just talking about, I take a vitamin every day. Maybe I should start taking CBD every day too. Anyway, any medication that goes out of a pharmacy, it says what you're taking. It says 250 milligrams per capsule. It says 160 milligrams per 5 mLs. If the bottle leaves that pharmacy without that information, I don't want to know what the total amount is. I want to know what the percentages are, yes, but I want to know dosing. And if you can't standardize it and you can't measure it, you can't get data and you can't do research. So if this is not standardized and if this is not put out there like a true trial, you'll never get the doctors to go with it. We're talking science. Doctors do science. I do science, but I also do art. And the art is you got to deal with the patient. So compassion. Expand the research, Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, and measure it, and don't let it out of the farm. In Colorado, you can't work in a dispensary unless you're a pharmacist. I don't want people selling to my patients, this is on sale, why don't you get some? That's not it. I want the CBD, the THC, what are the terpenoids, and what are you getting? Because they can't call me back and say, I'm taking cannabis or I'm taking marijuana. I don't know what they're taking, and they don't know what they're taking. So know what you're doing. Anticipate federal regulations, legalize it, legalize, don't penalize. We were talking earlier. Prohibition is what is making this so popular. Mark Twain said it. You want to make something popular, make it illegal. If we make it legal, we'll do a whole lot better. So my art of this is attitude, research, taxes, ART. Big messages. Get the date straight on the certificate. You know, they come to see me, they see me on a special date, and by the way, it says month, day, year in one place, and then day, month, year in another place. How much can you try to confuse people? Get it right. You put it on an Excel spreadsheet for me. Why is one of my patients listed 3 different places? One is enough. Get that right too. Number 2, again, at the dispensary level, gotta be milligrams per ml, milligrams per drop. What's in a vape? They only need to take 2 vapes, but what are they getting? CBD and THC at school. The nurses won't give CBD, and they certainly won't give THC CBD. But this is against 1990 Americans with Disability Act. I have encouraged people to sue the school because a doctor is making a recommendation. And what is the problem here? Another one, you don't need 2 doctors to do this. 1 is enough. And I skipped by something that is pretty important. It comes out of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it does say that if a child has a problem that other medications have not helped, or this child is dying, it is appropriate for the pediatrician to okay cannabis. It doesn't say he needs a specialist. It just says he can do it. And that's really what ought to be. So I'm way over. I will just read one more. Dear Dr. Ruby, we cannot thank you enough for how much you have helped our son and us as a family. We continue to see big improvements. This is about an autistic child, and a new world for him every day. We look forward to updating you at our next follow-up. He can finally enjoy the sunshine outside without needing a hat or sunglasses. Thank you.
Very powerful, and thank you for your work and leadership. Pediatrics is a very contentious area, and I think one that is extremely important. So we'll move along to Jan. We've already heard her background.
Oh, boy, did-
So we'll move on to you and see what your 3 takeaways should be.
Well, I wish I could say that I had 3. I'm trying to still whittle them down to 3. But first, I just want to thank Dr. Ruby for what he's saying about, as a mental health provider, I have seen what cannabis can do. I work with autistic patients. I work with patients with eating disorders, PTSD. And when you see what happens with your patients, I feel like it's very unethical to provide them the care that they need. And one of the things I'm really concerned about that I see are some large healthcare institutions. I don't know if Massachusetts has this much, but a lot of physicians are being told that they cannot prescribe, they cannot write for applications. And even physicians who agree with it are being told by their healthcare organizations that they're not allowed to prescribe this, and that or to recommend it. And that is very concerning to me. I've had patients with cancer who went to probably the top 3 oncologists in the US. There are 2 patients that come to my mind. They both had stage, they were basically terminal, and 2 different types of cancers. So one went to the best oncologist in the US who told the patient that he was not allowed to recommend this because the institution where he worked wouldn't allow that. And the other patient went to their local oncologist, wasn't on USA News and World Report, but they were easily able to recommend it. And I think that's a huge patient issue. Another thing for me is we absolutely, and I mentioned it earlier, have to discuss and have to really know exactly what is in the cannabis that's being used. We need to know the terpenoid content, we need to know the cannabinoids, we even need to be able to study them because I feel like the research that's out there is incredibly incomplete because we don't know what the profiles are. And so our patients don't know. I know education is huge as well. But one thing I think, I try to philosophize a lot, unfortunately, I'm not a philosopher, but the mind and the body are the same. We talk about psychosomatic symptoms, we talk about pain. Well, you can't look at one without the other. They both influence each other, and we need to be able to realize that cannabis is a gateway to well-being. Cannabis is a gateway to healthy functioning. If you know the science behind the endocannabinoid system, you know that this is really about achieving the optimal state of being, homeostasis. And we keep forgetting about that. And I love that you had mentioned this, that this is about health. It's not necessarily about sickness, and we need to be able to say that. Also, I would like to see more of us who are users to come out. Because frankly, I think until we start to dispel the myths about the lazy pothead, until we're brave enough to say, this is who I am, and I'm fine the way I am, and I'm doing well, that we're always going to have this stigma. And so for me, we've had this conversation about whether or not we should show this on the podcast or not, because we have a video thing to it. And I hate that conversation because I consider mine therapeutic use. And my use is not abuse. And we have to quit thinking that use equals abuse. And especially in my field, it's maddening. I'm totally going more than 3. And then the other thing is that we need to have more inclusion. We know that in any kind of research that you cannot, most research used to be based on white males. And we need to be able to have inclusion of minorities, females, and different experiences come to the table because we actually grow from that. We have an opportunity in this field to make a huge cultural change, huge, if we hold to these ideals that this plant, I think, can promise us. All of us are very different. We all have unique experiences, but we're all here for the same reason, to learn about the substance, or the substances. And I think that we have an opportunity to make sure that this isn't about big pharma, that this isn't about big tobacco or even alcohol getting into it, because this is what's happening. And we need to be able to be vocal about that and to be part of the solution. I said this earlier, and we had this debate last week with another person that I don't like adult use, really don't like recreational use. It's therapeutic use. And we need to be able to recognize that people are using this for reasons, very important reasons. We see, I gave you an example of my anorexic patient who went to the dispensary. And as a treating clinician, and if you've ever dealt with an eating disorder, you know that even if people gain weight, they're never psychologically okay with themselves. I have seen this drug actually make people accept their bodies, who've had years of body dysmorphia and who've been able to find some acceptance that they never could have. As a clinician, that is so powerful to me. I've had a patient who had flashbacks all the time. And this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. He doesn't have the flashbacks that he used to have. We found him a variety that was incredibly healthy for him and helped him feel vital again. His wife had committed suicide and he had found her. He was really struggling. I was afraid he was suicidal. He was suicidal for a while, and this medication has helped him live the life that he used to have. And we know that mice without CB receptors, actually, they keep having these constant thoughts. And so by having these receptors in our brain they're able to, when they're having a healthy endocannabinoid system, whether or not they're supplementing it with phytocannabinoids or if it's just healthy regardless, it actually helps them not to have these flashbacks, not to have these memories. They're able to forget. And when you start to see this, and I think all of us have seen this with our patients, that it's incredibly powerful, and you can't argue with that. But I really want to look at also the ECS and mood regulation. That's my near and dear to my heart thing, and seeing how we can really impact mood functioning by a healthy endocannabinoid system. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks for all your work and leadership and research in this area. I'm really looking forward to reading more studies that come out.
If I ever edit that journal.
And we all know Dr. Witherspoon, so I won't repeat his biography as well. But what are your three major takeaways?
Okay, well, first of all, Marion said we were going to span the spectrum from pediatrics to end-of-life care, and she looked this way. I'm hoping with end-of-life care, she's talking about Dr. Zaklin, because I'm a primary care doctor, and I try to keep people alive, not kill them. So hopefully you're talking about him, not me. I certify medical cannabis patients as part of my primary care practice. I'm trying to integrate it into primary care, which ideally, I think that's how it should be, just like any other medical treatment. I'm one of two physicians at MGH that do that. I've been doing it for about 2 years. About 6 months ago, they said that we're allowed to do it. So it's interesting what Jan says about doctors saying they're not allowed to do it. They both are and aren't allowed to do it, depending on which of the many. We have about 20 people that regulate us, and according to the federal institutions that regulate us, we're not allowed to do it, and according to the state people that regulate us, we are allowed to do it. And I think it's sort of intelligence test for hospitals how they deal with the medical cannabis issue, because patients are all asking for it, like everybody's asking for it. And the hospitals could either say, we just don't deal with this, and our doctors don't prescribe it, certify it, or they could try to figure out a way how to accommodate patients. And I'm really glad to say, and it might be just because I've been bugging the crap out of them, but my hospital is being pretty intelligent about this, and they're actually trying to come up with a way to accommodate patients. Now, the problem is you're not allowed to bring cannabis into any hospital because it gets federal funds and it's illegal, and they have to confiscate it. And otherwise they will lose all their federal funding. It's not their fault. They don't want to confiscate it. Most of the people there aren't against cannabis, but that's just the way it is. And they're worried that if their outpatient doctors recommend medical cannabis, then that creates the expectation, if you use it as an outpatient, that you could use it as an inpatient. If I start you on a blood pressure medication as an outpatient, of course you could use it as an inpatient. So there's no other medication with that situation where you can use it as an outpatient, but you can't use it as an inpatient. So we're having meetings, and they're really trying to finesse this and figure out how it works. But I'm really glad that my hospital is trying to figure this out. Whereas I read recently the Cleveland Clinic just said, none of our doctors, none of our practitioners, and we just as an institution don't believe in or prescribe medical cannabis. And I'm like, you guys are brain dead. That was my exact diagnosis on Twitter, that this institution is completely brain damaged, because you just can't do that across the board for a million reasons. I mean, patients are using it. What are they going to do? Lie to their doctors? And then what are the doctors going to do? Just pretend that their patients aren't using it? It's just awful care. It undermines the doctor-patient relationship. It's just ridiculous on a bunch of levels. And it goes back to what I said before too, about doctors have to get on board and they have to become educated. You have these addiction psychiatrists that go to their patients and they say, you don't use marijuana, do you? And the patient says, no, of course not, doctor. And then, that can be one way of taking care of patients, but then you don't know what your patient's doing. They don't tell you, and they go to less reliable sources of information. So one of my big things that I say on my high horse is that doctors, whether they're pro, anti, or neutral about cannabis, need to be educated enough to have an intelligent discussion and dispassionate discussion with their patients. That's like the bare minimum. So anyways, I just wanted to talk briefly about one of my patients, just because it's relevant to the group that Steve and Randy and Marion are working on. It's a patient with PTSD. He couldn't get the time of day from the VA. He was using 8 shots of vodka a day for his PTSD. and was very miserable. And then we worked to switch him over to medical cannabis. And now he literally takes 1 or 2 sips from his vaporizer a day, and his PTSD is like completely controlled. He goes out of his house. Whenever he starts to feel out of control, he takes a puff, and he's just flourishing. It's just really amazing. The good news is that he's doing like phenomenally well, like reborn, like he's like 60 years old. He's a veteran from the Vietnam War. The bad news is that he had to leave the VA for his healthcare and come to our health center. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm really eager for veterans to get much more open access to this. The areas where I'd like to see research progress and improvement, as you probably can tell, I'm pretty eager for physicians to get more up to speed on this issue and to be less judgmental and less sort of, programmed to be against it, and to at least have an open mind about it, if not be, on board with using it for health and wellness. And then there are certain clinical conditions that I think are urgent that we get more research on, particularly the opiate crisis. I mean, more people are dying every year from opiates than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. About 70,000 people a year are dying of the opiate crisis, and 49,000 people died the entire Vietnam War. I mean, this is crazy, and cannabis is such an obvious gateway out of the opiate crisis. And then, as Jan mentioned, benzos are out of control too. Most people don't overdose just on fentanyl. It's always fentanyl and gabapentin and a bunch of other things, including benzos. And people do prescribe too many benzos, meaning, as you mentioned, diazepam, Valium, Klonopin, Xanax. And it's because people are stressed out. We have an anxiety epidemic, which mirrors our epidemic in opiates and in benzodiazepines. And, it's really hard to treat people's anxiety. And if they're having panic attacks, it's really easy to prescribe them something. And cannabis is so much safer an alternative. So I think that's, as Marion's research showed, that's like what 1/3 of people use cannabis for. But I think that physicians, especially the addiction psychiatrists, shouldn't be treating these people like they're using something harmful. They should be recognizing that they're using something that's helping them. So the two things that I mentioned are related: the need to research it more for mental health and addiction purposes, and the stigma that doctors still cling onto with their drug war mentality. And then the final thing I'm going to say is we do need more research specifically with these mental health uses, autism and anxiety in particular. At one of the meetings at my hospital, the head of pediatric addiction services said there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that cannabis is effective for any mental health condition. Boom, end of discussion. And then he's like, the dispensaries won't work with me to do research. I'm like, of course not, because you're against it, and any research you do a priori will be against it. And he got a little bit offended, but we had a good talk. But the fact is, the fact is, we do need good research. And the thing he was arguing, he's really smart. The point he was arguing is that a lot of these young people use cannabis for their anxiety. And just like people with opiates and chronic pain, it's hard to tell if the opiates are treating the chronic pain or if they're just physically dependent, and then you take away their opiates and they feel awful because you take away their opiates. And the opiates aren't really doing anything for their chronic pain, because there's not really good data that opiates even help with chronic pain. Just once people get on them, they feel awful if you take them off. And with cannabis and anxiety in young people, I think it really helps people. But he was making the argument that it might be the case if they just get anxious when they're not on it. And he was looking at it like they have cannabis use disorder. And I'm looking at it like they're treating their anxiety appropriately. And it's just amazing that there are two completely different narratives in the same medical world. And I just think research could help narrow that gap. I mean, I think the truth is probably some people do one, some people do other, but the fact that we have such divergent theories and we all have the same goal of helping people would really help if we had some good research, so that we're not just arguing about it in a research-free zone. And then the final thing, it would be great if we did more research on diabetes and THCV and different cannabinoids. That one in particular, diabetes is so epidemic. I can't wait for more of that research to come out. Anyways, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you. Both for your presentation and for your thoughts and for your leadership. It's just really incredible to be a colleague of yours. And next up, we have Dr. Ryan Zachlin. Dr. Ryan Zachlin is a trained internal medicine, geriatric medicine, integrative medicine, mind-body medicine, and cannabinoid medicine specialist. It's a mouthful. It's a lot of specialties. He earned his Doctor of Medicine from the University of Virginia and completed his training in internal medicine at Mass General Hospital. After serving on faculty at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Zachlin continued working for partners within the Spalding Rehab Network. In addition to his current partner's position working in skilled nursing facilities, he also maintains a private practice in integrative medicine and cannabis therapeutics. Within his practice, Dr. Zachlin works together with his patients, partnering his foundation in internal medicine with mind-body medicine, yoga, energy medicine, herbal medicine, cannabis, therapeutics, nutritional, and functional medicine to help them return to their natural state of balance. He views optimization of the endocannabinoid system via plant medicine and other integrative disciplines as an essential to achieving this goal. Being an accomplished musician, he has a particular interest in the link between ECS and music. So thank you, Dr. Zachlin, for being here.
Thank you. This is on.
Thank you, CQRN, Marion, and Randy, professional badasses. They're labeled from here now. Better Alternative Healing, joint ventures for this gracious invitation, and to all involved. I guess I'm anxious to hear about this, the announcement that's coming. So you kind of already talked about who I am. I'm a conventionally trained physician, I trained at MGH. I kind of was on an unofficial mind-body medicine track with the Benson Henry Institute, and much of my integrative training has happened during all of my free time in my adult life. And I look at integrative medicine as a comprehensive, holistic partnership where I use both conventional and unconventional, often natural modalities to help patients elicit their own innate ability to heal. And as Marion mentioned, I help people come back into balance. And I feel fortunate to be practicing during an era in which the endocannabinoid system, our own physiological system that helps us maintain balance or homeostasis, has now come to light. And I think it's important, and I really appreciate Jan mentioning several times, this is really not about cannabis. It's really about our own physiology and the ECS. And cannabis happens to be the most efficient way to optimize it, therapeutically, although perhaps deep breathing and quick meditation is the most efficient way. But it's really about the ECS. And I've been fortunate to have trained with partners, and I've been working with them for over a decade. I have my private practice. But I also work in skilled nursing facilities or nursing homes. I take care of both short-term and long-term care patients. And I've been working with this population now for about 7 years, and I've done some continuing medical education, geriatric training, but I'm really kind of a grandfather, that's funny, I'm a grandfather geriatrician, right? Kind of grandfathered in. But what's interesting is that the geriatric credo, which is start low and go slow, is also the cannabis therapeutics credo. And it goes quite well with my affinity for natural modalities because I'm actually quite conservative when it comes to medications, and I'm a minimalist. And so using cannabis therapeutics medically, right, medicinally, is completely different than therapeutic use. There's an overlap, but most of my patients that come to me, their referrals through the Partners Network, they're cannabis naive. They're not familiar with the cannabis culture. They're not already using cannabis. And so my youngest patient is 18, my oldest is 96. And so I think it's really important to make that distinction because that's part of the issue, is that the medical cannabis model has blossomed really from the cultural, therapeutic, or recreation. I like to think of it as recreation, right? So recreation, we're recreating ourselves in a way. We're stepping back and allowing ourselves to kind of take a minute to recreate who we are. But that's part of the issue, is that the model has kind of stemmed from that. And I think we need to, as Dr. Ruby has so eloquently stated in so many ways, we need to kind of cut it off and revamp the system from a medical perspective and make it look more like a medical system within which we practice. So one of the first barriers that I know within skilled nursing facilities and hospice programs is that they're federally funded, right? It comes down to this federal misscheduling, right? Because at this point, to be frank, right, it's horseshit. It is medicine. There's no debate. It's a fact. I put up a slide when I'm giving a talk, and it's a photo of the earth in front of the sun. And I say, before I go on to discuss cannabis as medicine, we have to be on the same page. The object in the front is round, and it is revolving around the object in the back, correct? Because if you think that it's flat or that the latter, then, then we're not on the same page here. And so I really think that that's the biggest barrier because, you can only kind of, there's so much work to be done. So for me, I'm going to kind of go where it's a little bit easier to get things done and make headway, right? And this is why we're all here. But these skilled nursing facilities, they won't touch it. They're not going to threaten their funding. And hospice, to be frank, which I'm sure Tracy will tell us about, it's frustrating. I mean, I'm biting my tongue. It's a joke. Every single hospice patient should be on cannabis. End of story. There's no question. But yet, how many hospice referrals have I gotten? Zero. So it's, to me, that's a real big part of the problem is just the fact that these, and I think Peter had mentioned too, right? I mean, one of the concerns is long-term effects. It's a perfect population. We don't have to worry about long-term effects. And I really love how you eloquently stated that these people can really enjoy these last few days, weeks, months that they have with their families and actually maybe benefit from some of the more mind-expanding aspects that cannabis offers, in which they might actually deepen their connection and their understanding about who they are on their journey as they exit their body to whatever it lies next for them. Right, so I really think that it's so essential that this happens. But for me, I've kind of decided, I'm not going to keep knocking on the hospice door until the new administration changes over or whatnot. There's so much more work to be done. So the second piece is I think the entire certification/registration system really needs revamping. I tell my patients the certification is superfluous to our relationship. Right? I mean, I used to say a monkey could certify, but I'll say a computer could certify. I mean, really, right? These patients have an ICD-10 code from their physician, from any physician. So if that physician has billed for that code, we live in a technological age, it can just register with the state and they can therefore be eligible for this medicine just as they're eligible for every other medicine out there. It makes no sense to me as a system, but again, and so now let's even look at some of the details. It's geared for a highly computer literate population. All right, stating that a paper application is available is a weak compensation. There has to be a middle ground because uploading a non-glaring photo of one's license in an appropriately sized JPEG format to wait for 2 weeks while you're suffering to finally find out that it didn't go through and you have to resubmit it is an atrocity. My patients, my 85-year-old with Parkinson's can send an email and can do online banking. My staff can barely register them. We have a service that we offer, they pay for it, but we assist them with registration. So I think that, that's a huge barrier. And not to mention too, when I started going to assisted living facilities, okay? So what do you need in order to get your CCC card? You need a valid Massachusetts driver's license, passport, or ID. Who the heck has a Massachusetts ID? That's not right? I don't mean to make a comment because there probably is some population that I'm maybe not considering who would have it and need it, but most people have a driver's license if they drive. If you are now needing to live in an assisted living facility, most likely you don't have a valid driver's license. You may not be traveling the world much, so you may not need a valid passport. So let's say you do have a passport. Well, now you need a utility bill. You need all of these other bills now that if you're in an assisted living facility, you don't get those articles, right? So it's just, that's a huge barrier to entry. So it's like the skilled nursing facilities, hospice won't touch it. What about the assisted living facilities? Well, they need licenses and all this. It was just, for me, it got to be too much. And I said, you know what? Let's focus on the vets for now. I'm willing to focus on all of them, but at least we can make some headway. So now the last one is also important. We've all talked about this. So consistent products is so essential, right? I make recommendations to my patients. I mean, I think frankly, to not is unethical. If you're I can't prescribe it, but I'm recommending a medicine, and to just, recommend that the bud tender that just, lost their job at EMS is gonna make a recommendation on how to manage their complex Parkinson's or migraines or PTSD or anxiety or whatever it is just unethical. And so what I tell my patients is, I'm going to, this is your first fish, and I make a specific recommendation, but then I also teach them how to fish, and I teach them about the ECS and how to come up with the ratio of CBD to THC and what dose they need and what terpenes, if that's necessary and whatnot, and what it means, some of the terminology. But what happens to some of my patients, it's analogous to me prescribing an antibiotic, okay, and they go to CVS and they either say, no, I'm sorry, we don't have that. No, they don't have it anywhere in CVS, we're out of it. And the kid behind the register says, oh, Cipro? Well, how about Bactrim? It's just as good, sorry, right? And so how is that for my therapeutic relationship with my patient who I just spent all my time and energy convincing this 80-year-old gentleman that it's okay to use cannabis, right? And made a very specific recommendation. And now they can only go to the one spot that has it and they can no longer have it. So who's gonna tell them what to get? That's not an acceptable model for medical care. So, and the model is mostly flower-based and inhaled medicine-based as well. I think this stems from initial seed blossoming into a high THC black market due to the illicit nature, and it really needs to be weeded out, right? I don't condone smoking to my patients ever, and I rarely recommend vaping. The cartridges are a potential bridge to therapy, but due to heavy metals that are found in them, they're concerning to me. We're adding back terpenes based off of what clinical data? Okay, terpenes have toxic metabolites when vaporized, so I'm not comfortable necessarily recommending highly processed products. Ideally, a live rosin and a high quality cartridge would be the only thing I'm really comfortable at this time, and possibly vaping whole flower. But the average 77-year-old is not grinding up their granddaddy purple, loading up their packs, hitting the right setting, and then it's gummed up. Oh, let me get my rubbing alcohol and dip it in and clean the thing out and rub it. It's like, it's just not a good model. So until we have an FDA-approved medical grade whole flower vaping device with consistent dosing available everywhere, I'm steering away from inhaled medicine and flower. So we need high quality, organic THCA. Nobody's talked about that yet today. We need THCA available everywhere. It's available, thank you, Netta, for the one place in Massachusetts that has it. Healthy Farms had the 1-to-1-to-1-to-1 for 5 seconds, and that's gone. We need THCA, indica sativa, and CBD tinctures with consistent concentration for dose titration. Dose titration and low dose 1, 2, 5 milligram gummies and capsules available in every dispensary in the state. It has to be available everywhere, not wax and shatter and peanut butter and pizzas and all these things that are fun for our therapeutic events that we're having, right? It's not medicine. So, I can't condone, again, for reasons I just mentioned, the concentrates, I can't condone them at all, but the other is fine. I'm not saying anything against it, sure. I think there is high risk of increased, 11-hydroxy-THC and the risk of psychosis with these high-dose edibles and whatnot. So I don't think it should be willy-nilly. But I'm not telling my patients to go get a pizza and eat a quarter of it, in the morning and another quarter, whatever. I don't even know if they're still making that. And then the other thing is that the medical cards the reciprocity has to happen on a nationwide scale, because for somebody to be dependent on a medicine and have to fly anywhere with it, out of the country, sure, I understand it, but not have their medicine is really, is terrible. So what would help these barriers, right? Federal rescheduling. I think we have plenty to do on a state level. I think we had just mentioned, one quick thing. I think one easy fix for barriers to entry is you need an exam, right? Well, this is not a medicine and we're not prescribing it. So why do you need an actual physical exam? You just need a bona fide relationship with the patient. I mean, we can perform mental health via telemedicine. So why can't we do it like a state like New York or California where telehealth is acceptable? I think that's one step. But really, I think most importantly is that our fellow physicians need to stop with the nonsense. Okay, it is medicine. Stop considering therapeutic adult recreational. The data based on high dose smoking is not going to apply to starting low, going slow with literal drops of a tincture at micro dosing. So I think that needs to change. And I'm sure I went over, but thank you very much.
Some very important points, and well taken. And the last speaker, thank you so much, Tracy. Last but not least, Tracy Gregory is the Quality Assurance Staff Development Nurse at the Hospice of Western and Central Mass, and loves helping people learn, excel, and have a little fun while doing both. She graduated from Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts with a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and a minor in Philosophy, and has spent the majority of her career in the healthcare industry, gaining experiences in areas of pediatrics, psychiatry, intensive care, education, medical and surgical work, long-term care, and hospice. She's the point person for the agency's We Honor Veterans program and is an advocate for patients' access to medical cannabis. So thank you, Tracy, for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. So I'm writing my notes and the things I'm going to say, and like the more everybody talks, I'm like, nope, you already said that. You already said that. So I can easily keep this in my 7 minutes now. So you already have sort of my background. So the last 5 years I've been in hospice. So I've been a nurse for over 23 years now, and it really wasn't until like 2 years ago that I never heard of endocannabinoid system, even what it was. I have several chronic pain conditions that I have managed with more than several medications. I try to get my meds in a little pill box and it would mean go in. So I decided to see what this is about. I got my card, and honestly, within like 6 months of starting to do this, I went from a 4 opioid a day habit to maybe a 4 opioid a year, if it's really bad. So I could see it, and I wanted other people to see what it was too. So I started integrating it into our orientation programs. Every single one of our staff members was educated about it. And then the more people see the education and the more we had patients and families that wanted to know more about it, it just sort of grew and grew and grew. So now it's not just a matter of like the academics of it, it's just actually like seeing it happen. So because all of you are able to speak to different things, I'm going to speak sort of specifically to veteran PTSD at end of life. She mentioned we are a veterans program, and it's actually a national program that hospices and some of the businesses can partner with. And there's 4 stars. Now there's going to be 5 stars. There's a level, and at each level you have to obtain different things. So the basic level is for every patient, they get a military history assessment. So we don't want to just know, are you a veteran? We want to know, where did you serve? What war did you serve? What did you do? Did you see combat trauma? Because when we have that history, when there's other things that come up later, we may be able to figure them out. But we had one veteran who, whenever the curtain around the bed would be pulled, would become very highly agitated. And then looking through his history, discovered that he actually was a helicopter pilot. So for him, whipping those curtains around was a trigger, was a flashback of the helicopter blades. So if you don't know somebody's history, those little things like that, you don't know. And we really want to give the best quality of care that we can. So I want to also point out, so yes, I'm at the end of life spectrum, but don't always assume that end of life means elderly. Because unfortunately, we have people in their 30s, and their 40s, and their 50s that are at end of life, which brings a whole other aspect to everything. So we know that PTSD symptoms is mostly 3 clusters. You have your avoidance clusters where you don't want to go or talk about or be anywhere near what might you think about the trauma. And the second piece is that PTSD doesn't leave you alone. It is intrusive, it is in nightmares, it is your flashbacks. It's not just, oh, when I think about that thing, it bothers me. It's not going to leave you alone. And then you have the anxiety and all the emotions that go with that. Okay? So what we find is veterans with combat trauma sort of process it in 3 ways. And the first way will be that they are able to process it and they're able to make peace with that. And we see this mostly with our World War II veterans eras, because of just the culture of that war and when they came back and everything that went with that. The second trajectory is veterans who took the combat trauma, they developed PTSD, and they just suffered with PTSD from the get-go. The third trajectory that is the one we see the most often is sort of this delayed processing. So the trauma happened, and we see this sometimes with female veterans that have sexual trauma, is yes, this trauma happened, but I have a mission to do. I don't have time to deal with that. So you just shove that trauma deep inside and you move ahead with your mission. And it gets shoved inside for so long. And then comes maybe your terminal diagnosis. And then all of a sudden it comes back. They've never processed it, they've never dealt with it, and it's completely overwhelming for them. Even just getting that terminal diagnosis could be enough to be a trigger. And so when PTSD occurs, one of the things is that you have to have had a feeling of helplessness. So when we see this with our veterans, and especially our nonverbal veterans, is having that feeling, so I am now, I need other people to help care for me, and I'm helpless again. That feeling of helplessness and trigger and make them relive that trauma. So you may have this nonverbal veteran who is agitated and upset. We don't know what's going on, but in their heads are literally reliving the trauma that brought them to PTSD in the first place. We're quick to throw Ativan at people. Does Ativan have its place? Yes. It's not great for the elderly, which you guys know too. But what happens with seeing veterans is you give them Ativan to calm them down, and it actually has a paradoxical effect. It makes them more worked out. So if I am believing that it's my mission to keep all of you safe, then I'm trying to do that, and you give me something that's going to make me like a little drowsy, I'm not just going to go away. I'm going to fight even harder to stay awake. So now you take this veteran, and now they are more agitated and they are more upset with this other medication can work that way. So in hospice, if we do use morphine, morphine absolutely has a place in hospice. And I know there's some stigma things, but it's at end of life. I'm not going to go to the corner and try to get heroin or anything like that. It does have a point. However, getting veterans to take morphine is a whole other ball of wax. They don't want to seem weak. Now, together, are you in pain? No. Ow. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to take it. For some veterans who are really suffering and trying to make peace with things that they did, and we are seeing it, there's a lot of our Vietnam vets, is they deserve the pain. They don't want it to be taken away. They shouldn't be made to suffer. And when we get that they finally do take it, it's like, oh, I didn't realize. Okay. And that's what we're also seeing with our vets that start to use cannabis. Is when they finally start to use it, seeing how that anxiety actually helps reduce the pain, where they weren't even thinking that the anxiety might even be a factor. So we had one veteran who he had started with those little chocolate edibles. And he enjoyed them very much. And even his daughter had said, like, I got no idea how much his anxiety went into breathing. He was happier, and then he's like, hey, what you guys eat around here? Oh my God, Dad, you're hungry? He's like, yeah, we whip up the mac and cheese and go for it. And it's just brought so much of his quality of life. And that was just really good. Right. So one of the other tasks that we have at end of life, and again, it doesn't mean that you're elderly, is to look back and do like a life review, like you're kind of talking about. And that's one of the tasks you do, is to look back on what you've lived, how your choices, and to make peace with that. If you don't make peace with them or some sort of acceptance, it's not going to lead to a good death. And we all deserve a good death, and we especially deserve our veterans to have that good death. However, if I got PTSD, I got all this anxiety, and then I got all this avoidance. I don't want to talk through any of my trauma or any of my stuff. Cannabis allows them to decrease that anxiety and be able to walk through the trauma and process it and offer that very nasty picture. But it's up to them to do that. And like you said, it's a gift. Cannabis can give them that gift to do that. Legislation-wise, you guys pretty much already said everything that I want. Obviously, our folks in nursing homes don't have any access to it because federally funded places are not going to allow a federally illegal substance. Home patients. So I know during like the Veterans Day week and all that stuff that a lot of agencies were doing free certification, which was wonderful. That's really wonderful. But a lot of our patients are too weak to go to the certification. Okay. They need someone to come to the hall to that. Some places will come to the home, but it's for an additional fee, which brings us back to the first place, they don't have the money. Okay, they're on an income, and then we have a younger batch who didn't plan to suddenly get stage 4 pancreatic cancer due to the chemical they were exposed to. Maybe their spouse had to be a caregiver, there's been no outside income. Just don't have the extra money for this. Okay. The second thing they don't have is time. They don't have time. I don't have 3 to 4 weeks. I don't have 3 to 4 weeks to wait. So we had one veteran, he did the right thing, he went down, he got his card, finally got his card in the mail, went to the dispensary said, well, no, you can't come in without a caregiver with a card, okay? This man's bucket list was, he couldn't believe that a dispensary was actually a thing. For being a 65 child, he wanted to walk into the dispensary and order some weed according to him. He had passed away before his daughter's caregiver card ever came in. I mean, it's a community, he was able to access cannabis and he was able to use that, but by following like the rules that the state has set up, had he not been allowed to access anything, it's unforgivable. It's just absolutely a travesty. So for my dream legislation is I would like to see every hospice patient, veteran, not veteran, at the very second that doctor writes, you have this terminal diagnosis. Here's your free access.
Yes.
Go to the dispensary right now with your caregivers and get whatever you need. And many dispensaries are offering a discount. I've seen between 20 to 40% of a discount. Absolutely, because again, they don't have the time. You know, when I think about the veteran care too, it's just like every single day we wake up and we take for granted that we are in a free country. We are in a free country. We're not occupied. And these poor veterans that have the PTSD as a result of the trauma that they suffered, earning us that victory and the liberty that we are taking for granted. And I think it's great that a lot of institutions and dispensaries were doing free products and stuff like that. But as far as I'm concerned, every single day is Veterans Day. We need to appreciate them for that. I am going to wrap up with one story that I was voluntold that I was going to tell. So, let's see. We have wonderful hospice nurses. You know, there's hospice nurses and everything, but they're very tuned into what people need, and they're very tuned into the needs of veterans. So we had a young veteran couple. They were actually in their late 30s, and the spouse had a stage cancer as a result of the chemicals that he had been exposed to. He did not have long to live. It was in the fall, and the family said, well, we really want him to hang on till Thanksgiving, see everybody, say our goodbyes, and this man did not have till Thanksgiving. There was no concern with it. So our nurse said to him, what is your favorite holiday? And he goes, you know, it's actually the 4th of July. She said, okay, round up the family, you're gonna have a 4th of July picnic. They had the barbecue, he had his whole family, they got fireworks and all that. So he had donated cannabis. So him and his wife were able to sit, they had a little porch overlooking, and couple by couple, his family member could come on. And the anxiety was reduced, his pain was handled, that he was able to say those goodbyes. It's a powerful gift. It's a powerful gift. And I know, didn't think that, but I really, like, our nurses were just amazing to do that. And Ativan didn't do that for him. And morphine didn't do that for him. Cannabis did that for him.
Thank you so much for everybody, and we're a little over time, but I'm not upset by that at all, because I wish I could give you more time, all of you more time. I think from birth to the end of life care, through veterans, through addiction, we obviously clearly see how cannabis can play a role. And really grateful to hear from you all of some of the next steps that we should be looking at, both from a science, a clinical perspective, a regulatory perspective. I think, you know, we're at an important time and an exciting time that we can take some of these recommendations and really try and continue to improve access. So we'll go ahead and maybe we'll take one question. One burning question, there's one that quit right at the beginning.
Hi, my name is Kaylee. I was just wondering how you feel it's best to address, I guess from like a social media, like a young way of like approaching the next generation so that it becomes something that isn't stigmatized. I just would like to see like how, if there could be like a consensus about how to approach it so that the red flags don't immediately go up to everybody that you talk to about it.
We have in our practice a lot of adolescents, teenagers who actually are coming in telling us that they're using cannabis to control anxiety or control mood. And initially it was it was interesting, it became a conversation around what do we do? They're under the age, what do we do? And so what we found is that we tried to educate them on it. I don't think they have the stigma that my generation had around cannabis. It's a lot more socially acceptable. They actually, my experience with adolescents is that they tend to see it more from a therapeutic perspective. Just, maybe that's just because I'm dealing with mental health issues, but they tend to do that. We're seeing a lot of that with our clients, but they're actually not so much abusing it. We use that as an opportunity to have a conversation about what healthy endocannabinoid system regulation looks like and what it doesn't look like. I teach a lot of mindfulness-based practices so that they can pay attention to how they're using any substance, whether it's alcohol or cannabis, but really trying to get them to understand that this can be something healthy. They just need to know, like I believe all of us need to know how to use it in the most healthy form we can. Does that make sense?
It does. I do feel there is quite a stigma with my friends anyways. I'm 29, so I consider myself like very old, but at the same time I think like there is still a stigma attached to it.
I know, I'm like, oh wow, I'm ancient. I did get my AARP card this month.
I think it has to do with controlling the narrative. There's like two different narratives about cannabis. One is that sort of tired old narrative that it's bad, it's evil. Like again, the addiction psychiatry community doesn't really recognize recreational cannabis. They think all cannabis use is harmful, pathological, a medical abuse, a medical problem. And there's this whole other narrative that's increasingly emerging, both as people like all of us in this room work together, and as patients have more positive experience, and as it gets legalized and more people use it, adult use, the sky doesn't fall. Actually, a lot of good things are happening in Colorado. Not only, for example, when they legalized cannabis in Colorado, not only did the opiate prescriptions and overdoses start to drop, but all the prescriptions started to drop. People, instead of getting a muscle relaxant, would use cannabis. People, instead of having to go to the doctor and get Viagra, would use cannabis. People, instead of using Ambien, which is actually pretty dangerous, would use cannabis to sleep. And the alcohol use dropped 10 to 20%, generally when they legalized cannabis, which is why the three biggest contributors to these ridiculous, whenever there's a marijuana or cannabis ballot initiative, the three biggest contributors are big pharma, the alcohol industry, and the private prison industry, because those are the three biggest losers. So there are in the rehab industry as well, because they love treating cannabis addiction, whatever the heck that is. So there are two different narratives, and I think we're winning in changing the narrative, but it's like an ongoing battle with that book by Alex Berenson, and the American Society of Addiction Medicine is like so anti-cannabis, and they absolutely shouldn't be. And most medical societies are against cannabis still. So I think it's a question of continuing to provide an alternative, which ideally will become the dominant narrative, so that people in your generation and younger will grow up and not just hear the same old, this is your brain on drugs, but we'll actually hear about the benefits and hear a more balanced and nuanced message.
Wait, can I say, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that I love to start off, and I didn't do it today, a thing called Just Say No, KNOW. Because my generation grew up with Just Say No, NO. And for us, it's more about, we're really trying to teach what it can and can't do.
Yeah, I think that part of it too within the culture, right? As I mentioned, you have this culture that's come out of the recreation or therapeutic culture, but we need to stop with the, bipartisan cannabis ship in the sense of the CBD versus THC. I mean, people don't even realize in the JAMA study that looked at 84 online products, 20% of them had upwards to 6.23 milligrams per milliliter of THC, okay, in it, which meant somebody who's taking one drop or twice a day is actually using more THC than I recommend. But yet they could be touting online that, look, without the high, I feel great, CBD is great. I'm not, there's no this anti-THCism, I think, has to kind of end. It is an intoxicant at high enough doses. Just like if you take a sip of wine, you don't feel anything, right? A quarter glass of wine, you can have a conversation and drive, even a glass of wine. So I think THC, I think just say no is perfect because people just simply don't know. And you have this kind of social media reactionaryism using CBD, but really misusing it and in a misleading way. So I think it's education.
Okay, we can all have philosophies, and I think that our message really needs to be to Shailene, because she's going to make it.
No pressure.
Not just her.
And I will give you
No
specifics for the nursing homes, the caregivers. You can't have just one caregiver per one patient. Those caregivers need to be able to give it to a lot of people. So that's got to be gone. Reciprocity, this is a medication. Right now, there are only 9 states with reciprocity. Massachusetts needs to be the 10th. The other thing is, when I gave you that pamphlet, your caution to make it safe and effective, make it a safe and effective program, has delayed implementation. There cannot be analysis paralysis. Get it out there, open it up a little bit more. Granted, make it safe, make it effective, but let it get going. Because regulation cannot be synonymous with complication.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for talking.
This is all understanding that Shailene is one of our heroes.
Yes. Thank you all for the grants. We're really, very, very impressed with your work, and, thank you so much for being here today. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, speakers. We're now going to be inviting Stephen and Billy back of American Alternative Healing to share a special announcement here. And I'm going to ask Marion and Randy to stay up close as well. So take it away, Stephen. And Sid. What the heck, Sid? I'm not forgetting about you.
Thanks again for everyone coming here to this show we put together for everyone. Service dog loves to serve all the time. So I wanted to talk to everyone about an exciting new collaboration that has taken place. We're actually at the State House on Friday afternoon, doing some stuff in between snowstorms. We have I get too many names. Alternative Treatment for Veterans organization started by Revolutionary Clinics, Disabled American Veterans, C3RN, as well as myself and Veterans Alternative Healing. The initiative we have is to make changes available to all veterans. Like we just heard, every stage of life here, veterans are part of that. We have kids, we get old, we get sick, we're one of the most diverse segments of society with everything, all the people all the volunteers that join and serve. And we want to make, changes nationwide. We did for Americans that get sent overseas to foreign lands where we're not liked very much. It's silly to come home and have these imaginary lines keeping us from getting the same care across the country. Same thing goes for the VA. We have VAs in every state, but the level of care is not the same. Some that are rated at 4 or 5 stars, and we have others that are rated at 1 star. The reports coming out about the oversight committees looking into the VA and finding there's more problems not getting fixed. People that continually make bad decisions for vets that are actually causing death and still being able to be employed there is a huge problem. And the DAV realizes this with the over 1 million veteran members that they serve on top of the other millions of veterans that they not only provide rides to their appointments for, but just to have a network of care for veterans and having it done by veterans instead of just having people giving us handouts. It's more of a handout. It's more, like I said before, it's more of a shoulder to lean on, someone that can understand. We want to do that with all the resources we have here. We have some of the most incredible hospitals and healthcare networks here. We have the education community here. We have such great schools. We have a Cannabis Control Commission that listens to everything we say, and although they can't make the changes right away, there's nobody in this room or out of this room that can make changes that quick at the federal and state levels. It takes time, but just saying that it takes time shouldn't stop us from getting together like this. Shouldn't stop us from continually advancing cannabis forward into where we need it to be. So these problems are not left for generations that follow me. I have young children. I have a 7-year-old daughter that wants to be a veteran. So the fact that she wants to go and serve, I'm not going to let that happen without making it what it needs to be. I'm not going to stop anyone from wanting to serve either. I think it's an amazing thing, and you should never have to worry about the promise made to you being broken by the people that send you to do these things. So we're going to focus on making change, like I said, across the state, across the windows, across the country, so that veterans are not left in the dark and like we do overseas, and we'll do it here. We'll kick the doors down and make it freedom for everyone. So it's really what we're focused on here. We want to thank our partners. I think we still have Revolutionary Clinics. Is Judy still there? Can you please stand?
Stand up.
Dr. McNabb as well, she's on the board too. Yeah, she just bounced on the next follow-up. See you. All right. So thank you again. Here's Dr. McNabb.
Thank you all for coming, and thanks, Steve. It was very exciting on Friday to launch this new nonprofit that's aiming to improve the access to medical cannabis for veterans, but also research around it. And we're really grateful today to launch our Veterans Research Study. And so thank you all for being a part of it. Thank you for being here for this event. Today will be the extension of our 2016 Open Cannabis Consumer Patient Survey, now launching for veterans to take. It's an anonymous online survey. It's a little bit longer than the survey we did before because we're asking important issues such as service history and the other things that you mentioned, Tracy, and also dosages. What we're trying to understand is the medical conditions that veterans face, their current treatment regimens, if and how they use medical cannabis, what are some education areas, access, stigma, family acceptance, etc. We're very excited that our partners are Revolutionary Clinics, Basque and American, The Botanist, The Healing Rose, Central Ave Compassionate Care, and INSA. And so anybody who takes the survey, any veteran who takes the survey does not have to be a cannabis consumer. But we're trying to educate around this. They can take the survey. And then they'll receive discounts at any of these partner groups. So we're very, very grateful to our study partners. We could not do this without you. We've had to be very creative about combining industry and academia, and we're really, really grateful for our partners. Dr. Stacy Gruber from Harvard is also a colleague and an advisor on this project, as well as an advisor for the new nonprofit. So we're aiming to really try and standardize the way that we are documenting cannabis research studies and metrics that we use to continue to add to the literature. So the survey officially launches today. In the spirit of citizen science, anybody who takes the survey will also be able to see their results compared against everybody else, furthering our idea of democratizing access to data. It should not take 10 years for a publication on PTSD in veterans to get published, which just finished, clinical trial just finished last week, but it shouldn't take that long. So our approach is take the survey, see how you perform, and use that information to better veterans' own health. So we will be analyzing data throughout the year at these 6 events, as Steve alluded to, in our Cannabis Advancement Series. And then we'll also be holding patient education events at our partner dispensaries to really understand local, the way that we can use this information locally for veterans within support groups. Steve will be running monthly support groups and support with C3RN. We're going to train veteran citizen scientists to use this information, again, to improve not only their own health care, but their community's care. And this is all approved under the UMass research study that we currently operate in, and so we're quite excited to continue to add to the body of literature. Is there anything on the, yes,
what is the extent of who do you want to, is it just Massachusetts veterans or do you want nationwide?
Well, that's a great question. So we're focused on Massachusetts, and we're excited that we've partnered with the Massachusetts Disabled American Veterans for this study. The goal is to be national. We wanted to create models here locally that could be taken elsewhere, or learning from elsewhere and implementing them here. And to that note, the special partnership with Revolutionary Clinics and the Disabled American Veterans Center Alternative Treatment for Veterans, what we'll be producing is a policy memo, an analysis of all the results of Massachusetts, and presenting that in a way that is palatable for policymakers, specifically in the veterans areas and the VA, both locally in Massachusetts and nationally. So we'll prepare that policy memo by August for the DAV's national conference. So we're trying to take Massachusetts, really make it strong here, but anybody in the world can take the survey, actually. You just have to be a veteran of 21 years of age. So the reason why we really promote democratizing access to data is of importance. You know, we have a very well-respected panel, very educated group, and we applaud and need researchers and clinicians, but those kind of professionals can't do this alone. We need to have everybody needs to be able to use data and information, go back to your communities, be able to understand it. That's why at C3RN we believe in bridging communities, academics, and clinical healthcare providers, and the importance of what we like to call citizen science, which I'd like to invite my business partner, Randy McCaffrey, to give us our.
Before I kind of kick into my little citizen science talk, I want to recognize 2 specific people that really helped us build this survey. One of them is here, DJ Ritter. Stand up, please. Thank you for these surveys. And Sean McCaffrey, who's not here today, but also a very important person. Not related. So, as many of you know, research in cannabis is not only woefully underfunded, but the federal government has created barriers to research in many forms, including regulatory hurdles and the lack of ability of representative samples of cannabis. So last year when we were in the process of designing and launching our first open cannabis patient and consumer research study, we decided that we needed to change the paradigm of how research in cannabis is done. What we chose to do is take a citizen science approach. Now, citizen science is defined as scientific work undertaken by members of the general public, often in collaboration with or under the direction of a professional scientist. I'm not a professional scientist. I actually got my PhD in School of Hard Knocks, much more difficult. Our intention is to implement this approach in the cannabis industry. An example of this would be in 1989 is one of the first recorded mentions of the term citizen science in any literature. There was 225 volunteers who collected rainwater samples to assist the Audubon Society in an acid rain campaign. So you can kind of understand how this might work. So how do we apply this to cannabis? So show of hands, how many of you in the audience have used cannabis or are currently using cannabis for some medicinal or therapeutic use? And how many of you have gone through trial and error to try to find what actually works for you? Just about everybody. So that process, that commitment to an understanding of your own biochemistry, it makes you a scientist. It makes you a citizen scientist. And I think collectively, if we can bring all of this information together, our own personal experiences, that is what's going to drive the understanding and the observations that move into more rigorous clinical trials. So we need this information just to move into something deeper. So with that, I'd like to bring Ann back up and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Randy. I would like to take a moment and invite our study partners up and give them a little acknowledgement. They were very brave in leading the change when we pitched to them to participate in this project, both of a communications arm as well as leading the Citizen Science Data Project. They were like, heck yeah, so I want to go ahead and welcome American here, if Tim's around. I'd like to invite Chapman here of Basque. I'd love to invite Judy here of Rev Clinics. I think Ross, Ross from the Bonus, come on up, please. And Laura, I think Zach's outside of the Healing Rose, but we want to give you some faces here of those who are brave to help lead the way, put the money where the mouth is and put the community where the mouth is. So, we're just going to take a quick picture with Ben. But yeah, this is, if we can all just kind of come in a little closer here, squeeze a cheek. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Oh, Zach's coming. Hold on, Zach and the Healing Rose. Come on down. Zach, come on down real quick, Zach. So, yeah, and then we, of course, locally grown source small business here at that. So come on in. We'll take a quick picture. All right, Ben. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to be wrapping it up today. In closing remarks, I just have something to say for Mother Teresa, actually. As you know, there are talkers, lookers, and doers. Mother Teresa has awarded the Nobel Prize in 1979. She said that when we work hard all day, it feels like we are only a drop in the ocean. But if our individual drops were not in the ocean would be dry. Each of you is a drop in our ocean. And without each of you, we would be empty and dry. So please never forget how important you all are in this movement for access to all. We'd like to acknowledge those who have served both our country and those who have paved the way in cannabis research and access in the Commonwealth and in the States, and a special shout out to Dr. Lester Grinspoon and his family. Thank you very, very much. Also, a very big thank you to our keynote speakers for joining us today. Jan coming in from New York City. We had Dr. Peter Grinspoon, thank you very much. And we had our panel speakers, Tracy and Commissioner Title. Yes, I'm sorry, and our keynote speaker, Commissioner Title. And keynote speakers here, Tracy Gregory, our nurse out in the Western Mass area, Dr. Ryan Saplin, Dr. Eric Ruby, and Dr. Grinspoon again, and Jan, wherever she is. Thank you very much for participating in our panel. So on behalf of Veterans Alternative Healing, Cannabis Community Care and Research Network, Joint Venture and Co., our study partners, sponsors, staff, we'd like to thank you all for making time in your busy schedules to join us here this Sunday. It's been our pleasure to host this event. Thank you.